Good morning. Good morning, my friends, and thank you so much for coming to hang out with me today for this last minute addition to our trial coverage. I am feeling much better today. Thank you. You know that I have strong ties to Boulder, having gone to college in Boulder, and I lived there for 7 years during college. And I loved Boulder so much that I stayed there for law school, and I lived in Boulder while I went to University of Denver Law School. And so when this tragic mass shooting happened back in March of 2021, it shook me to my core. And I know that I have a lot of watchers, viewers from Colorado. So are any of my Colorado peeps here today? I've got my Buffs colors on today. Sadly, the Buffs really blew it the other night. It was an embarrassing loss to Nebraska. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. How many of you are familiar with this case? Yeah, I remember when this happened too. Okay, and your mom is from Denver. On March 22nd of 2021, 10 people were murdered in a Kings Soopers supermarket in Boulder by a 21-year-old man. His name is Ahmad Alissa. And he's now claiming that he has untreated schizophrenia, and that's what caused him to kill those people in Boulder. It was a tragic situation. I remember watching it while it unfolded, and it was horrific. So for those of you who are not familiar with this case, I want to go back and show some of the initial coverage on it. I'm really surprised, like when I went to look for information on this on YouTube this morning, that nobody's really covering the trial. You know, no YouTubers are streaming it live. No YouTubers are commentating on it. And this is such a huge case, in my opinion, that I'm really surprised. So I'm like, I'm going to do it. We're doing it. I don't know how much interest there's going to be in it. I hope there's a lot of interest in it because this is horrific. It's an insanity defense. It's Colorado, so there aren't cameras in the courtroom, but we have WebEx to watch. So it's not that great as far as visuals are concerned, but the audio is not horrible. So what I'd like to do today is show you a little bit of background from the initial news reports on this case. And then we're going to go into the Boulder courtroom and watch the opening statements, which happened. I think the trial started on Thursday. Today's Monday. Today's day 3 of the trial. And then the first 7 witnesses who testified on the same day as openings were all eyewitnesses. And we can watch their testimony. I don't know if we'll get to that today, or we maybe need to break today up into 2 different streams. So let's start with, this is Denver 7, and this was day of, it's entitled Active Shooter Reported at Kings Soopers in Boulder. This was my supermarket. I lived a half a block away from this Kings Soopers. This is where I did my grocery shopping. This is where I went to cash checks. Because back in the day, you had to cash a check. There was no such thing as an ATM. Young kids. And this was my Kings Soopers. So this really devastates me. Let's take a listen to, this is Denver 7. This was breaking news at the time. Remember, this was March 22nd of 2021.
I'm sorry, we are hearing now that our reporter, Atty Guajardo, is there in Boulder near that Kings Soopers where this active shooter situation is happening. So let's check in with Atty now. Atty?
And it's definitely a very developing story right now. We're off Broadway and Baseline, about 3/4 of a mile from the Kings Soopers, where that active shooter, we're being told, is at currently. We're not being let any closer at this point than this area that we're at, which is over by Base Mars Center. You can see there's a number of officers back there blocking the roads, making sure nobody gets through. We've seen fire trucks, ambulance head over that way. We understand that some people that are in that parking lot at that Kings Soopers are on social media, have been seeing a strong police presence. There was one individual that was reporting while live on YouTube that he did hear gunshots. We are trying to get a hold of that individual right now. But Anna and Shannon, this all is so early right now, so we're not being let any closer to this. It's not just this road that's closed. There's another road adjacent to this road that's also shut down. We've got a chopper in the air trying to get some aerials of what that scene looks like right now, but we're still gathering more information. Boulder police have simply said there's an active shooter at the Kings Soopers at Table Mesa. As you can see, lots of police presence right now. Nobody being let into that area, just people being let out of this area.
Atty, if you could, before we can piece together actual facts, a couple of things. One, have you seen any ambulances go to those awaiting medical helicopters? And two, what is the sense, at least the pace of the law enforcement presence there? Does it seem frantic? Does it seem worried? Are they still arriving?
Well, Shannon, just about 5 minutes ago, we did see an ambulance rush over that Kings Soopers on Table Mesa. There was an officer on the adjacent street where we were trying to get a little bit closer to get a better view for you guys. That individual did sound a little worried, a little concerned, was making sure nobody got through. The officer here right now next to us is pretty calm. He's been designating traffic to get over to that Kings Soopers and making sure that the people that need help have the help that they need and the assistance that they need. I have been seeing a lot of posts on social media. We were actually working on a story, Shannon and Ann, about the impact on bars due to madness. And we were in that bar. We got the phone call from the news desk telling us that there was an active shooter situation at the Kings Soopers. There was already people at that bar telling us, hey, are you hearing there's an active shooter at the Kings Soopers? So that the word was clearly spreading very quickly and people want to know what exactly is going on. You can see right now a little further down the street, there's a fire truck heading over to that Kings Soopers at this moment. So it just seems like everybody's kind of trying to get their bearings, see what's happening, and respond to it as needed.
And Atty, just to give us a little perspective, if we can see Atty's camera right now. So Atty, just tell us again where you are exactly. Director, if we can see Atty's camera right now so she can give us perspective on where this road blockage is, Atty, and which direction, where they're telling people to go. So what intersection is that behind you? Can you tell?
Yeah, and we are right now. And right now we're over off Baseline and Broadway. It's a major street right now. It's over by Basemar Center, about 3/4 of a mile from that Kings Soopers on top.
For those of you who are familiar with the area, this is at Broadway and Baseline. It was this Kings Soopers in Table Mesa, and that's where I lived at the time, in Table Mesa. Some people are saying, yeah, it's on Law and Crime. I know it's on Law and Crime, but nobody's commentating on it. So that's the coverage that I'm going to show you, because that's the WebEx and it's the only coverage we have. There's no live cameras in the courtroom, but I'm glad you guys want to watch it because I'm here for you and I want to watch it too.
Mesa. And 27th is a little where you see all those vehicles blocking. That is 27th. I can't really see if that's a street or an avenue from where I'm at right now. Okay. But as you can see, nobody's being let any closer to that area at this moment.
Okay, thank you for that perspective. Go ahead.
And I'm gonna toss it back to you. I think one of the officers is trying to get my attention, so let me see if I can gather some more information from him shortly. All right. And I'll be right back.
Please do. We'll talk to you
a few minutes.
In just a second. Atty Guajardo, our first reporters arrived there in the.
Good evening, and it's great to have you with us here as we come on.
Okay, and here's when they got somebody when they got somebody in custody. This is when they first apprehended this gentleman. And this is ABC World News coverage with David Muir.
Have you with us here as we come on the air in the West. And we begin tonight with the horrific scene playing out late today in Boulder, Colorado. Those initial reports of a gunman in the parking lot of a grocery store, then moving inside, then reports almost immediately of multiple victims. The first images coming in, the awful scene at this Kings Soopers grocery store. Authorities say there were calls of an armed man with a long gun in the parking lot. A massive show of force, police swarming the scene still at this hour, surrounding the building. Police seen walking a man away in handcuffs. The governor of Colorado late today saying our prayers are with our fellow Coloradans in this time of sadness as we learn more about the extent of the tragedy. And we have learned more tonight about what played out in that store. And ABC's Kana Whitworth leading us off.
Tonight, a shooting rampage at this Colorado grocery store, leaving multiple people dead, including a Boulder police officer. Thousands watching this live stream by ZFG Videography as the events were unfolding.
There's a shooter, active shooter, get away!
The call coming in around 2:30 p.m.
136, hold all radio traffic, everybody just go.
Law enforcement rushing to the parking lot of the Kings Soopers grocery store.
Looks like we have an active shooter. The white male, middle-aged, dark hair, beard, black vest, short-sleeved shirt.
Reports of a shooter armed with a long gun moving inside the store. You can hear the gunfire on the radio traffic. Police alerting the public on Twitter, avoid the area.
Officer down inside the building.
Copy. I have an officer down inside the building.
SWAT teams and fire responding, raising a ladder to the roof, trying to secure the scene.
The entire building is surrounded.
Police trying to communicate with the shooter barricaded inside.
Come out with your hands up, unarmed.
Witnesses.
I remember watching this unfold. The college was locked down. It's bringing tears to my eyes just watching this. It's horrifying. You might want to get your tissues ready.
Is inside the store saying they heard multiple gunshots and immediately ran for the exits, some escaping through the back loading dock.
There was a guy laying out in the street as soon as we got outside, and I started running towards him to try to help him, and my son grabbed me by my coat and said, "No, we can't help him, we gotta go."
At just about 3:30 p.m., police with long guns escorting this man, shirtless, with blood running down his leg, leading him to a stretcher.
There he is. I don't know if you're able to see him. He's shirtless and had no shoes on, barefoot.
This man, shirtless, with blood running down his leg, leading him to a stretcher. He appears to be in handcuffs.
This is a tragedy and a nightmare for Boulder County.
Just a horrific scene unfolding late today, and let's get right to Kana Whitworth. Kana, I know there's a heavy law enforcement presence still there at the store. We know there are reports of multiple injuries. What more are we learning at this hour?
David, police are saying they have a person of interest in custody. Also, authorities are just now getting into the building to start their crime scene investigation. They are also confirming multiple fatalities, including a Boulder police officer. David?
Pure Jealousy lived in Boulder at the time and says, "I lived in Boulder when this happened. My kids were in school right down the street. It was horrifying. Boulder's a great little town. I lived in Boulder. I went to CU undergrad and I did my law school at DU Law, and I lived right in Table Mesa, a half a block from this Kings Soopers. So Boulder's an amazing town. It's built up so much since I was there 100 years ago, but it devastated the town at the time and still. And I'm really surprised nobody's doing any, just YouTube coverage. I know Law and Crime is covering it, but aside from that, I haven't seen it. So we're picking it up, guys. We're here for it.
Kana Whitworth leading us off with breaking developments. Kana, thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel.
All right, thanks, George. And this is going to be, and this may be a little bit triggering, but I wanted you guys to listen to it. This is, I don't even know if we want to hear this. It's the radio. It's the police radio response that happened while it was ongoing. So I find this stuff kind of really interesting. So I'm going to play it for you. I'm just going to trigger warn you a little bit.
Police were responding to reports of an active shooter here. We were able to listen to their radio communications as they exchanged information. This is information that we don't share with you in real time because quite frequently it's inaccurate, because it is such an initial information. And even when it is correct, it can put both civilians and officers at risk. Listening to that radio traffic and sharing it.
Remember the radio transmissions that leaked during the Ruby Frankie Jody Hildebrandt case, and some of that was inaccurate, and the rumors started going wild around it. And I appreciate that they didn't broadcast this in real time, that they waited and sanitized it. This is 9 News in Denver back around March of 2021.
After the event, though, gives us some perspective on what police were up against. Our Marshall Zellinger has that.
Kyle, that first 911 call came into dispatch at about 2:32 p.m. From that first indication of an active shooter to the time police ultimately took a suspect into custody, about 50 minutes went by. You're about to hear conversations between the dispatchers and patrol officers, the ones who were the first to respond, indicating that the 911 calls were no joke. You're going to hear the additional officers needed to track a suspect and take them into custody.
It looks like we have an active shooter.
204, party down in front of the store. Does not match the shooter description. 204, possibly 2 parties down.
We have multiple calls coming from inside of people that have barricaded themselves inside. I just had another party that's upstairs, second floor, hearing shots. 204 and 295 are making entry. Unit full traffic.
204, got another party down just inside the door. The shooter is inside. He just shot at us twice.
Copy, active shooter inside, shot at them twice.
Officer down inside the building.
136, we're in a gunfight, hold the radio. 136, so multiple shots being fired at us. It does not sound like an AK. We're taking multiple rounds. So far, potentially one gunman armed with a long gun, potentially near the back of the store. We can get some officers to set up in the rear. We have multiple people down, or with the FD, we have multiple people down. We're going to need to airlift some people out of here.
213, description of shooter, 30s, white male, beard, wearing a attack vest. Be advised, suspect armed with a rifle, unknown location inside.
They pegged him as being in his 30s, but he was actually 21.
I need to push into that officer. He's about 30 yards inside the store down. We cannot get to him. We have no known location of the shooter. We think he might be setting up an ambush. Start pushing slow, but be advised, we do not know where he is. He is armed with a rifle. Our officers shot back and returned fire. We do not know where he is in the store.
Traffic, we're in contact with possible suspect.
Per intel from the suspect that was pulled out, he said he came here alone. Nobody else inside, but originally we got a call that there were 3 shooters, so unknown on the validity.
54 minutes from start to finish there. I just want to be clear that we monitor that police radio traffic. Like you said, Kyle, we do not share that until we know the scene is over and can provide perspective as to what happened. You can hear the chaos, the differing information, trying to confirm, do they have one person that they need to find or perhaps 3? There was a call earlier on that I didn't include in that they had originally heard 3 people. That's why they wanted to ring that store and getting all the customers and the injured out.
A report of multiple shooters, Marshall, Exhibit A, on why it's important that radio traffic is not shared in real time, because
Agreed.
The idea of people calling in multiple shooters is relatively common in active shooting situations. The sounds are echoing. People are not sure about what's going on. The folks inside the building are not trained in police tactics, so it's very confusing, and it's somewhat common for there to be reports of multiple shooters when that is in fact a statistical rarity among rare shootings, and it almost always is one assailant.
And I think it's important to be able to get that perspective of what we heard versus what some of us saw in real time with a number of officers outside of the store. Hey, why aren't they going in? It's perhaps they don't know. They know they haven't heard shots in a while, so they have to be more tactical about it and know, here's what we're going to do because this is what we're seeing and hearing in real time. And that police radio traffic helps us know after the fact what was going on with what we were seeing in real time.
Gives us an even greater appreciation for what they're up against, the uncertainty plus the danger. Marshall, thank you.
So that is just some of the original coverage on this. I want to also play for you some of the original coverage or some of the latest coverage. 1 second. That is talking about the ongoing trial and the defense in the trial. Well, here is actually some information on the suspect. Oops. Who is now on trial for the murder of 10 people. Hold on. David Muir again.
Picture now of the suspect emerging. And tonight we do have a clearer picture now of the suspect emerging. What we've now learned about him and what court documents reveal about his earlier run-in with the law and what he was allegedly doing just days ago. Here's our Chief Justice correspondent Pierre Thomas tonight.
Tonight, police uncovering potentially ominous missed signals as they investigate accused mass murderer Ahmad Alissa. According to newly released charges, a female family member told police Alissa was playing with, quote, a machine gun about 2 days ago at his residence. Family members were angry that Alissa was openly handling the weapon in the home and took it away from him before it was eventually returned. Another potentially chilling indicator of what was coming. Alissa last Tuesday bought a Ruger AR-556, a pistol that looks remarkably like a small assault rifle, which can accommodate a 30-round clip. Police say Alissa did not have a lengthy record, but investigators did point out that he was convicted in 2018 for misdemeanor assault on a high school student, accused of repeatedly punching that student. Other classmates telling the Denver Post that while Alissa was often pleasant, he was quick to anger and once threatened to kill his peers. But why Alissa, only 21 years old, of neighboring Arvada, Colorado, may have unraveled and allegedly exploded into mass violence, still unclear.
And it would be premature for us to draw any conclusions at this point in time.
Authorities are searching through social media posts and assessing whether some are authentic, including one posting on a Facebook page where someone identified as Alissa claims he was mistreated because he was Muslim and complained that he was being hacked. Law enforcement sources telling ABC News they're investigating whether Alissa suffered from mental health issues. His brother telling the Daily Beast he believes Alissa was paranoid.
And Pierre Thomas, President Biden briefed on the investigation today, he said, but also saying he would not speculate on a motive. And I know, Pierre, that you've also learned tonight that in Boulder, the ban on assault weapons enacted by that city several years ago was actually overturned just weeks ago.
David, the Boulder City Council banned assault weapons in 2018, but the ban was recently lifted after a judge ruled that state and federal law supersede the local law. The suspect bought that assault-style pistol a week ago today, but we don't yet know if it was used in the shooting. David?
All right, Pierre Thomas with us tonight as well.
So that was when they first figured out who this guy was. And it's chilling. And after you listen to the opening statements, I'm going to let you tell me what you think about whether or not this untreated schizophrenia defense is going to be successful. Before we do that, let's listen to Denver 7
thank you for
and their coverage from a few days ago, right before I think the trial started, and what their experts have to say about this defense and whether it will be successful in Colorado.
Thank you for joining us for Denver 7 News at 10 tonight. I'm Shannon Ogden.
And I'm Jessica Porter. The first witnesses were called to the stand today in the trial of the man who killed 10 people in a Boulder grocery store.
It's been nearly 3.5 years since that mass shooting at the Kings Soopers on Table Mesa Drive. And tonight we remember those 10 lives lost. Their families are now sitting through painful court proceedings as jurors decide if the shooter's mental...
This show is always about the victims. So let's name them. Suzanne Fountain, Tralona Bartkowiak, Officer Eric Talley, Rikki Olds, Neven Stanisic, Lynn Murray, Kevin Mahoney, Jody Waters, Denny Stong, and Teri Leiker, and may their families stay strong throughout the course of this trial. I can't even imagine how devastating it is. Prayers up to the families and friends and loved ones of these 10 people who were horrifically slaughtered in the Table Mesa Kings Soopers in Boulder on March 22nd of 2021.
State should absolve him of legal responsibility.
When you're sitting so close to someone who murdered your mom, murdered our parents, you don't feel like being civil about it.
The prosecution argued the gunman was sane on that day and that he deliberately was hunting people in the store, while defense attorneys say insanity is the only explanation to this tragedy.
I felt like crying when I saw the jurors walk in because, you know, they're being asked to do a lot and to see a lot and to think a lot, and I'm grateful for them.
Describe. The district attorney says this trial is expected to last a little over 2 weeks.
So the defense team here is arguing that untreated severe schizophrenia is what caused the shooter's actions that day.
Denver 7's Daniel Croyder joins us now with a breakdown of how that could play into an insanity defense.
Now, a not guilty by reason of insanity defense, for it to be successful, it does need to prove two things. The first being that the defendant did not know right from wrong. And also, because of their mental state, they were not even able to form criminal intent. Some examples of situations where someone would be ruled insane as if they suffered from a severe neurological disorder, mental illness, even poisoning, anything that could be shown that the defendant had a break with reality. I spoke with a behavioral health and law enforcement expert about the nuances of this type of defense.
Schizophrenia is a cluster of symptoms that consist of typically delusions and hallucinations.
Brad Shorstrom is the director of behavioral health at Advent Health Porter Hospital.
With schizophrenia, there's also some thought disorganization, a lack of motivation, a lack of get up and go and gumption.
How common is it for that sort of disorder to also be coupled with a violent behavior?
It's quite rare. I think the general belief in the media and in society is that people who have mental illness act violently, but they're certainly more violent than the general population. However, they are not exceedingly violent as the way movies portray it.
It's also important to note that having a mental illness and being deemed insane are not the same thing.
Insanity is a legal term. It's not a psychiatric term. So one could have a mental illness and still perceive right from wrong.
Knowing right from wrong is the first prong in an insanity defense. The second is
intent.
Former Denver Police Chief Paul Pazin responded to the shooting that day.
I believe 68 officers from Denver self-deployed. We knew this was a big critical incident.
To be found not guilty by reason of insanity, the defendant must show they were not in the mental state to even have criminal intent. Pazin said what he heard in court tells a different story.
Everybody's entitled to the best defense possible, but I truly believe that the prep work, the amount of time, or the little amount of time once the killing spree began really showed the intent prior.
The little amount of time, the first 8 killings were done in 68 seconds. 68 seconds.
Too, and a level of sanity.
Danielle Kreuter, Denver 7.
The families in Boulder are living through an experience that some in Aurora know too well. The trial for the Aurora Theater mass shooting got started in April of 2015, almost 3 years after 12 people were murdered at a midnight movie. The killer in that case also pleaded insanity. He was found guilty 3 months later, with the jury deciding that he planned his attack, lying in wait before he ambushed the victims. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Denver 7 will follow the Boulder trial for you every day until it's over, in our newscasts and online at denver7.com.
Okay, and we are going to follow it and recap it live and in person. Thanks, Melly, for your super sticker. I appreciate you so much. Laura says, get help if you see someone in mental distress. 100%. Thank you. Andrea says, well done, Melanie. Other YouTubers are probably afraid because they will lose subs because of the election on gun laws, etc. Well, because you brought that up, Andrea, the reason that I'm able to do this is because I have a sponsor for today's show. So if you do not know about the recent major data breach that happened and hack by a national data bureau, your social security number and every other American social security number is on the dark web right now because it was held for ransom. The ransom wasn't paid and everything was released to the dark web. But luckily, I have a sponsor who can help you with that, and their name is Aura. And let's listen to a word from our sponsor before we get back to our coverage with opening statements. Today's video is sponsored by Aura. And it's a really important time to be talking about them because hackers may have stolen the social security numbers of every American. Over 2.9 billion records were stolen from National Public Data, which offers personal information to employers, private investigators, staffing agencies, and others doing background checks. These stolen records include a person's full name, address, date of birth, social security number, and phone number, along with alternate names and birth date. And members of this hacker group have reportedly released this information on the dark web for free. I don't know if you've ever had your identity stolen, but I've had clients who've had their identity stolen. And not only is it a major hassle, but oftentimes before you find out, it's too late. The damage can take years to undo, and it's a hassle that you definitely do not want to deal with. So if you haven't been taking precautions before with your personal information online, this should be a huge wake-up call. You've never been more vulnerable online than you are right now. But I'm not too worried about it because I use Aura. Aura alerts me if they find my phone number, my email, my social security number, or any other personal information on the dark web. They're going to let me know fast if anyone tries to use this information to access my credit or bank accounts. They give me up to $5 million in identity theft insurance should the worst case scenario happen. They also provide a bunch of other features to keep you safe online, all inside one app. And you can go to my link at www.aura.com/Melanie Little to try it for free for 14 days. That'll be enough time for Aura to find out if any of your personal information or data has been exposed. I highly recommend you do this right now because not only is national public data not going to do anything to help you, they probably aren't even going to face any repercussions for this breach. I'm not leaving myself and my family vulnerable to data breaches. And if you don't want to either, you want to go to my link, www.aura.com/Melanie Little, to try 2 weeks for free. You can thank me later. You can thank me later. I've had clients who've had their identity stolen and other people, and it's a nightmare. Your credit can be trashed for 10 years or more, and you don't want that to happen. So the reason that we're able to cover such tough topics is that we have a sponsor. Take advantage of the free trial. Find out if your social security number is out there and what to do about it. All right, let's go into Boulder now. We're going to start with opening statements. The first up is the prosecution. This is the law and crime trial coverage. It's not great. The video is not great, but so if you're listening while you're cleaning or doing all of the other things that you guys do while we're watching trials, that's good because you're not going to have to watch the screen too much because there's really just not too much to watch. I will put on the closed captions for those of you who need them. And here we go.
This is Tralona Bartkowiak.
They sort of started late when they started this coverage. So this is the beginning of the coverage, and he's naming all of the victims and talking about them. So this is actually where it really starts.
Tralona is 49 years old. She's really well liked in the community. She owns a clothing store down on Pearl Street. And on this particular day in Boulder, there's snow on the ground. It's cloudy, but it's a mild day. And Tralona has her window down and she's driving through the parking lot. That's probably how she was able to hear the first shots. She's 49 years old. She will never celebrate her 50th birthday. Rikki Olds is the fourth victim. Rikki is 25 years old with a ton of potential and a great life ahead that she will never live. Rikki Olds worked at Kings Soopers. She's a head clerk. She's loved by her family and by her friends and colleagues at Kings Soopers as well. And at this moment at 227, she's over at the pharmacy area on the east side of the store.
227, okay? 227. If you know, you know. Karen Rechild, what happened at 227? Wow, that's crazy.
That side of the poster there on the left. Excuse me. Over here on this side. She's over by the pharmacy and by customer service, helping people who work there. And they really like that about Rikki. It's one of the things that she does that they really appreciate about her. It's also why she's about to be gunned down, because the shooter's going to come in the east doors. And he's going to end Rikki's life at 25. She wasn't the youngest, though. The next victim, Denny Stong, is 20. He's loved by his parents. He's 20 years old. He also worked at Kings Soopers, but on this particular day, Denny was off from work. He stopped in Kings Soopers to get lunch. His mom, Lisa, also works at Kings Soopers, and she was on her lunch break, and she's outside in her car in the parking lot having lunch as her son gets gunned down in the front of the store at 20 years old. That's Lynn Murray. It's a great picture.
We can't
Lynn
see the
is
pictures,
62
but as he talks about each victim, he's showing pictures to the jury.
years old. She's a loving mom. She has a great life. She works for Instacart, delivering groceries. And it's March 22nd, 2021, so we are still living through the pandemic. So Instacart's a really important job, actually. It means a lot to a lot of people. It's also why a lot of people in Kings Soopers that day were wearing masks. They're talking through glass partitions that soon will be exploded by bullets fired by the shooter. Some went to Kings Soopers to take care of themselves by getting COVID shots at 2:30 p.m. that day, and instead will face death. Lynn went there to shop for others who were unable to shop for themselves. Picture Lynn looking down at her phone. The final image she sees on her phone is this one. It's an order for Pamela A. How many bags does the customer need? She never gets to fill that out because she's at the checkout stand. And she's going to try hard to live. She's very determined to live. But the shooter is just as determined and just as intent on killing her on the spot. It's 2:28 p.m. and the shooter's about to get out of his car and begin killing as many people as he possibly can. But first, I want you to meet Teri Leiker. Teri is 51 years old. She's a really special person. She's overcome some significant challenges in her life, and she's worked at Kings Soopers for many, many years. And for people who live in the community, who shop at Kings Soopers at Table Mesa, Teri is a beloved fixture. She's a part of their lives. They go there, she's always there bagging groceries with a big smile on her face. And at 2:28 p.m., she's bagging groceries for an older gentleman named Patrick Cruz. And you're going to hear from Mr. Cruz during the course of this trial. But we'll never actually have the honor or privilege of meeting Teri Leiker. Her life is about to end. This is Jody Waters. Jody is 65 years old on this day. She has a loving family. And she's had a great impact on a lot of people in the world. And that's a terrific Boulder type picture, isn't it? Unfortunately, the next picture you're going to see of Jody Waters is her hiding under a checkout stand, living her final seconds on this earth.
This is a very effective opening.
PM.
Sorry, I talked over him. I'm going to stop it. We do commentate here because we're a YouTube channel, a LawTube channel. And also it's a part of fair use and we like to discuss in real time. But this is a really effective opening, in my opinion. Humanizing each victim individually and talking about what they were doing at the time of the shooting. He's taking the jury on a journey back to the day of, and I think this is really effective. I think Adam Lally might be able to take some lessons from this prosecutor. His name is Michael Darty.
And now it's 2:29 p.m. It was a regular day. For those 8 people, it's going to be their last day. And then the 9th, Suzanne Fountain. Suzanne is 59 years old. Her immediate family lives in New York. She and her partner live in Broomfield. And there's a hair salon in the Table Mesa shopping center that Suzanne goes to. And she went to that hair salon that day. So
the defendant is in the courtroom. We can't see him. He's in a wheelchair and he's not in frame right now. And I know this because one of the witnesses points to him in the courtroom.
She went to the Kings Soopers at Table Mesa to do her grocery shopping instead of the one near her house where she lives in Broomfield with her partner. But for that hair appointment, Suzanne Fountain is alive today. But for that hair appointment, Suzanne Fountain gets to celebrate her 60th birthday. Actually, but for the shooter, she gets to celebrate her 60th birthday. Because he's about to take her life. The victims are random, but the murders are absolutely deliberate and intentional. If Jody Waters had left the store 3 minutes earlier, I wouldn't be saying her name, and we wouldn't be asking you to hold the shooter responsible for killing her. If Suzanne Fountain didn't have a hair appointment in that shopping center, I'm not saying her name, and you're not finding the shooter guilty at the end of this trial, because she would still be alive. The victims were random, but the shootings were deliberate and intentional. This is Suzanne Fountain, and her life is about to end. There were 9 murder victims. There would have been far more than 9, but for the police response that day, including police officer Eric Talley. This is Eric Talley. He's 51 years old. He became a police officer as a second career, and he loves it. And by all accounts, he loves serving this community. So it's no surprise to his family and his colleagues that when he gets the call of active shooters at Kings Soopers, he races there as quickly as he can. And because of him and other police officers, many, many people are alive today. Many people are walking this earth. Unfortunately, there are 7 kids growing up without a father.
Father of 7, police
Because Eric
officer.
Talley sacrificed his life to save others on this day. I wish that the victim families, the loved ones of these 10 who were seated here and seated in an overflow courtroom could come into this well, that we could lift up the victims here, that we could use this courtroom to honor them.
Object. Personal opinion and meant to inflame the passions.
Response. Your Honor, I'm going to tell the jury what we're here for and what we're not here for.
Let's move on, please.
Okay, when we watch a lot of trials, and we saw this in the Karen Reed trial, and it was ruled that there would be no speaking objections. This is what they mean by speaking objections, when they go on a little bit about why they're objecting. It's kind of frowned upon to object during openings and closings, but sometimes, like you just saw, the defense, in this case, it was the defense attorney, is trying to get him to stop what he's saying because his argument is it's personal opinion and meant to inflame the jury. Typically, openings are supposed to be about what you're going to prove during the trial, what the evidence will show, and you're not supposed to give your personal opinion. So I want to just take it back a little bit and hear exactly what he said to see whether we agree with that.
Courtroom could come into this well, that we could lift up the victims here, that we could use this courtroom to honor them.
Object. Personal opinion and meant to inflame the passions.
Meant to inflame the passions.
Response. Your Honor,
And unlike Judge Cannoni, this judge actually lets the other side respond to the objection and say, what's your response?
I'm going to tell the jury what we're here for and what we're not here for.
Let's move on, please.
Sure.
Let's move on. She's not allowing it.
I am not going to show you videos, photos, and share with you powerful stories about their lives. That's not why we're here. Instead, we have the responsibility of going through videos and photos and powerful stories about how their lives were ended in cold blood. That's why you're here. The shooter prepared to kill them, planned to kill them, and went and executed 10 people at Kings Soopers. That's why you're here. You're here because the person who killed these 10 in cold blood is sitting right at that table, right there.
He's pointing at him, but we can't see him.
The defendant has chosen to exercise his constitutional right to a fair trial. He's asserted that he's not guilty by reason of insanity. And I'm going to talk about mental health in a little while later this morning, but I want to hit on it right now before we get into some of the facts in the case. This is the overview of what you'll have to consider at the end of this trial. Was the defendant so diseased or defective in mind that he was incapable of distinguishing right from wrong with respect to the murder of 10 individuals and the attempted murder of 25 more? Or suffering from a condition of mind caused by mental disease or defect, as the statute reads, that prevented him from forming a culpable mental state? And in this case, it's going to be intent. That's what this case is going to come down to. I don't want to share this with you before I go on, because this is going to be the most important question for you at the end of this trial. And you know how the law works. You heard it yesterday from the judge. He committed a mass murder on March 22nd. You'll be able to consider all the planning and preparation, and I'll talk about that in a little while. And you'll be able to consider everything. We're going to lay it all out for you so that you have everything you need to reach the right decision in this case. It was clear to me yesterday and the day before that you are a thoughtful group who wants to reach the right outcome. If you follow the evidence and you apply the law, you will reach the right decision in this case. Because the central issue is going to be his claim of not guilty by reason of insanity. Mental illness does not mean someone's insane. Mental illness does not mean someone's insane. When someone kills someone, or 2 people, or 3 people, or 10 people, or 22 people, we don't say, that seems abnormal, let's just send them to a hospital. There's a very straightforward test that the law applies, because our society and our law demands it. And it's a straightforward legal test. We covered a lot of ground in jury selection, as we're supposed to, but the test is going to come down to this, and this is what Judge Bakke is going to read you at the end. Could he form intent? Could he distinguish between right and wrong? This is a serious case, a hard case, and an emotional case, but it's a straightforward legal test that you'll apply at the end of this trial. This is what Judge Bakke will read to you as the law around sanity. Could he form intent? And could he distinguish between right and wrong? So as we go through the evidence, I'm going to give you a preview of it in just a couple minutes. And I'm going to go over it with you and provide you with an overview and guide you through it. But throughout this entire trial, think about it in terms of, what am I hearing that shows he's capable of forming intent, or incapable, but capable of forming intent? It'll make your deliberations much easier if you track it this way. What is he doing that shows he's capable of forming intent? And what is he doing that shows me he's able to distinguish right from wrong? And you'll be able to start to fill up these 2 boxes as we go through the evidence. And I'm going to take you through it now. And I'm going to take you through it in very calm, clear fashion. But I also want to recognize that as I guide you through what you're going to hear at this trial, that it is brutal and horrific and emotional. But part of what I have to do here is present it to you in a clear fashion and guide you through what you're going to have to go through. Because insanity is a straightforward legal test, whether someone's sane or not. Could he form intent, and could he distinguish between right and wrong?
Judge,
one thing,
it's a misstatement of the law. The law isn't and, it's or. It's a disjunctive.
That is clearly a speaking objection as he, argues in front of the judge and the jury, by the way.
This is what the law says. Incapable of distinguishing right from wrong with respect to the murder of 10 individuals and the attempted murder of 24 more, or suffering from a condition of mind caused by mental disease or defect that prevented him from forming the intent.
Correct it.
We'll give you all the evidence to answer those questions with a resounding yes, he was able to form intent, and yes, he knew the difference between right and wrong. So I'm going to take you through a couple things, 3 things to start that are going to demonstrate that he clearly was able to form intent. First of all, this is a mass shooting, 10 people are killed, but no one's hurt by gunfire. Not a single person. Think about that. What does that mean? What it means is, first of all, he was very proficient with the weapon. Second of all, he prepared for it. And third of all, if he hit someone, he executed them. No one hurt in a mass shooting by gunfire. Not a single person. 10 people killed, no one hit and hurt and wounded. That's in part because 9 of the 10 victims were shot multiple times. What that means, ladies and gentlemen, is that if he hit the person, he then moved in and targeted them and executed them. by shooting them again and again. And if he missed, that person had an opportunity to live. But anybody who got hit, he finished them off. That's why when you consider intent and his ability to form intent, the number, nature, and location of the gunshot wounds will matter. So how he carried out the shooting on March 22nd will tell you a lot about his ability to form intent. How he did what he did on that day, in that moment, will help answer the question for you of, was he able to form intent? Because of things like this, the number, nature, and location of the gunshot wounds that the defendant inflicted upon others. It will also help you, as we go through the evidence, to see that he understood the wrongfulness of his actions. And he understood exactly what he was doing was completely wrong and horrific. And that he was going to be held responsible for it. And we'll go through all that evidence. This is Neven's work truck. Neven had just fixed the espresso machine in Starbucks. Now he's back in the work truck and he's on the phone with his friend Johnny. And what's about to happen next is going to happen fast because the defendant is brutal and he's acting intentionally. Neven's on the phone. The black car next to Neven's white van is the defendant's. The defendant has with him an assault rifle, large capacity magazines, ammunition, handgun ammunition, and a carrier vest. And he gets out of his car and without any moment of hesitation, confusion, hallucination.
I don't think my stream is blurry. What I've done is, thanks Kim, but what I've done is I've enlarged the WebEx for you so that you don't have to look at that black box over there that's sort of empty. And we've enlarged it so that when the actual attorney does come in frame, you can see him better. So the WebEx from the court, that's their cameras. Pretty sure you can see me clearly, right? Like I'm clear, yeah. So what that is the court coverage. Nothing I can do about it. Like I said, this is more of like an audio trial than a visual trial. So it's not you, Kim, it's them.
Or delusion, he is up and he's moving and Neven is his first target. He goes alongside the van so quickly that Neven has just the opportunity to say, "What the F?" And Johnny hears booms close to the phone. And then hears a strange sound. And then hears booms a little more distant. And then the phone goes dead. And Johnny's left wondering what happened. And he yells for Neven. He yells, "Are you okay?" He texts him. And there's never going to be a response to another text to Neven because Neven is dead. Because the defendant shot him 5 times, including one right through the left eye that went into Neven's brain. There were 2 shots in Neven's head. The defendant was able to form the intent to kill Neven Stanisic. Johnny would later realize that Neven hadn't shown up at the next work site, and he would look up on his phone, was there a car crash in Boulder, Colorado? Because he's worried that the sound he heard may have been a car crash. And Johnny sees that there's a mass shooting at Kings Soopers and that the community has been devastated and that victims have lost their lives. And he starts to put the pieces together. And when he looks on the news, he finds out for sure that Neven's dead because Neven's still in his van being photographed by a crime scene and his legs dangling outside the driver's side door on the other side of that van. The defendant immediately starts moving east across the parking lot, turns and shoots back towards Neven's van again. And then the defendant sees Kevin Mahoney, a 61-year-old man. Kevin has an opportunity to duck. He tries to hide. He actually puts his hands up for a moment, and then he tries to run. But the defendant chases him down and guns him down by shooting him 4 times, including an incredibly close kill shot to finish Kevin off. As that's happening, Tralona Bartkowiak is in her car, her windows down, and she's driving. And she ends up making a strange turn, whether it be for fear or confusion or both, we'll never know because this guy killed her. And Tralona drives up on the pedestrian ramp of Kings Soopers. where people walk up to go into the store on the east side in those east stores. And Tralona wants to live. And she gets out of the car and she starts trying to run to the east stores for safety. And the defendant shoots her and Tralona goes down. Tralona starts to reach up and pull herself up on the railing for the pedestrian ramp. The defendant runs up, points his assault rifle down, and shoots Tralona point blank in the neck. So that gunpowder stippling is left on her face forever, and her life is over. And the doors that Tralona ran to for safety, this guy, he's about to run in to kill as many people as he possibly can. So I'm going to walk you through this animation. You're going to see a bunch of these during the course of the trial, but I'm going to take this first one slow so that you have an understanding of what you're looking at here. But with the help of the FBI, in conjunction with the district attorney's office, you're going to see a number of animations that have been put together because of weeks, months, actually years of work by the Federal Bureau of Investigation to provide you with an overview of where people were and how they were moving. This was done, and the other animations you'll see, by the FBI looking at different videos from security videos and body-worn camera videos, and then matching up all the timestamps and putting it all together. I'm telling you in a very simple way, but thanks to their work, we're able to see where people are and actually where people are moving. Because on some of these, I'm going to hit play and you're going to see people moving around as things are happening. Because this shows you a couple things. First, let me get you oriented to the colors you're looking at. The yellow bubbles on the screen are victims of attempted murder. People who are going to face possible death, but live another day. The individuals in orange, those orange circles, are people who are alive at this moment, but whose lives are about to end because of the defendant. And when their lives do end, on this animation, they become a large blue oval. So
I wish that we could see this visual, but we can't. But the FBI did some meticulous investigation in this case.
What you're looking at here is Tralona's car is on the pedestrian ramp there. Tralona is now represented by that blue oval, which means she's been killed. The purple dot is that guy. And he's heading towards those east stores. And you'll be able to see the writing better during the course of the trial, but each of those dots has a name next to it. So the two orange dots you see closest to the east stores there are Denny Stong and Rikki Olds. So at this moment in time, as the defendant's moving towards those east doors, there have been loud sounds outside, right? And he's firing an assault rifle in the parking lot. So you're probably wondering, what are people hearing? What are they thinking? What's happening? So some people hear those sounds or they see things and they recognize it to be gunfire and they start to move. Other people like Rikki and Denny are wondering what those sounds are and are moving towards the east doors to look.
I see some confusion in the chat. I see some confusion in the chat, so I just want to clear this up. The defendant is in the courtroom. He's not like Adam Montgomery in New Hampshire who never showed up to his own trial. He is there. He's just not in frame because this is a WebEx, because this is Colorado and they don't have cameras in their courtroom. And the WebEx camera does not have him in frame, but rest assured he is there.
Or who assume it's construction up on the roof. There's a little movement. There's some confusion at this moment in time. There's also over 100 people inside Kings Soopers right now. It's a regular, busy day. And then this guy comes in. That white circle shows the defendant with the assault rifle up. The first person closest to him is Rikki Olds. He's about to shoot Rikki once right in the face. Rikki Olds is the only victim shot just once, because when the defendant shoots her point blank in the face, he's accomplished exactly what he intended to do. Angela Peacock is the woman in the yellow coat there on the right. She works at the fuel center across the street. And these are hardworking people These are people who work hard for their lives to support themselves and their families. Angela's shift that day was 5:45 in the morning at the fuel center until 2:15. So she got off of work and then came over to Kings Soopers to do some shopping, and she's talking to her friends in the front of the store, people she works with. This is her workplace. These are her friends and colleagues. And she sees the shooter raise up the assault rifle and point it right at Rikki, and she starts to duck and she starts to run, and Angela goes down. She slips and falls right next to the checkout area there. And she's trying to get up. And as she's getting up, it suddenly hits her. This guy is not spraying the store with gunfire, she realizes. He's intentionally targeting people. She realizes in about 2 seconds, we're going to show you 2 weeks of evidence to support that he's intentional and he's deliberate. And she realizes she has a chance. So Angela runs as hard as she can all the way to the back store. And she's in the back of the store, and then she's heading to the back door to get out. And she actually can't, because there's a mass of humanity trying to get out the back door. And Angela is panicking because she hears the shots from the front, and she knows the shooter's not done. And she runs and she hides under a plastic tarp in another part of the store. The other person in that photo there is Denny Stong, the 20-year-old victim. Denny sees Rikki get shot right in front of him. And he turns and he starts to run. And the defendant shoots Denny Stong in the back. And Denny starts to go down. But he wants to live. So he keeps going. And the defendant shoots him in the back again. And then Denny begins to crawl between the registers to try to get away. And this defendant pursues him into the register area and stands above Denny as Denny crawls on the ground, and then shoots Denny a third time to finish him. You're going to put that one in the intent box. This next one as well. Because as he does that, he realizes he's empty in his magazine, which holds the bullets that goes in a gun. Pops out the magazine, pops in another one. You'll see it. Not a moment of delay. He was ready. He was prepared. He had practiced. He had planned for this. And that next magazine is in super quick because he is fast and he is ruthless. And now inside Kings Soopers, there's no confusion. There's just chaos. People are running. People are hiding. People are screaming. They're screaming active shooter, which 30 years ago, maybe people would have been confused by that. Now, customers and staff hear the bangs and they hear active shooter, and they know death has just come to Kings Soopers in Boulder, Colorado. And it's that guy. And people start to do everything they can to live. It's a question of what happens in a crowd of people who wants to live when a mass shooter shows up. What do? They're running, they're hiding, a bunch of people, everyone's moving fast now. But he is so deliberate, intentional, and brutal, and he's on the move, that he's going to catch a bunch of these people before they can get away. Let me talk for a minute about the victims of attempted murder. Because as the defendant then entered the front of the store, he began firing across the front of the store. There were bullets that ripped through victims that almost killed other people. And then there were shots that he missed. And we'll go through all of that. But there are 14 civilian victims of attempted murder.
I'm going to break for a second because first of all, we need to take a breath, but also I believe there are 55 counts. At one time, there was 115 counts. I don't know if it's been whittled down to 55, but he's going to tell us a little bit about that now.
Angela Peacock, Casey Taylor, Hayden Steele. Casey and Hayden were roommates, and they were shopping there together that day. Kahendra Mala, Jacqueline Julie Keaton, Paul Johnson, Kimberly Breckus, Micah Huang, Keisha Beresford, Kelly Ray Dorr, Patrick Cruz, James Graham, Sarah Moonshadow, Nicholas Edwards, and Christopher Tatum. In the interest of time this morning, I'm only going to talk about a couple of these folks, but all of them nearly died that day. And all of them will talk about, when they testify here, the slaughter that they witnessed in the front of the store, and the people who died in the front of the store, or the people who died right in front of their eyes. They are lucky to be alive. They don't feel lucky. Some of them are damaged, and they'll testify about that. They don't look back on this day and feel fortunate necessarily. Some are in better places than others, but you're going to see a lot of trauma in this case. The path of wreckage that he left behind when he dropped the rain of terror down on Boulder, Colorado on March 22nd, 2021. This is Patrick Cruz, the older gentleman who Teri Leiker was bagging groceries for. He's at checkout stand 9, as you can see. And just to get you oriented to this picture, Kings Soopers has these cameras above their cash registers. And you'll see these black squares on a lot of these photos. These black squares are so that people watching the cameras can't see what we punch in as our PIN codes, which if you never thought about before, you might be comforted to know there's something blocking you from putting your PIN code in when you do it at the supermarket. That's there in the camera system. More important in this picture is Patrick Cruz. He's older. He quickly realized that something was happening. Then he saw the defendant moving fast and deliberate. And Patrick Cruz realized, because he's an older gentleman and he wasn't going to move particularly fast, that his only chance at living was to go down and fake that he was dead. So he goes down to the ground and fakes as though he's dead for an hour until law enforcement rescues him. And he hid for that entire time because death came very close to Mr. Cruz that day. He'll testify about a bullet that whizzed between his head and Teri Leiker's head when the shooting started, before he had a chance to go down. And then he goes down, and the other person in that photograph there on the left-hand side is the defendant, wearing his carrier vest. And you see the right arm up. That's because he's holding his assault rifle, taking aim at his next victim. Another victim of attempted murder is James Graham, who was at the checkout stand buying ramen for himself for lunch. He works nearby Kings Soopers. And he would go to Kings Soopers and pick up his lunch very often. So he's buying his ramen, and then the shots start. And Mr. Graham hears bullets hitting the glass partitions right above his head. And he starts to run, and the bullets are hitting the glass behind his head as he's moving. Mr. Graham runs for his life, literally. And he runs as hard as he can. And then a pain rips through the back of his leg. And he thought he had been shot. But in fact, he pulled a muscle trying to run for his life. And he ends up outside in the back of the store, hiding in the snow, laying on the ground until law enforcement gets him up and gets him out of there. These are the things that people did to survive from the defendant's attack on that day. But not everybody survived. The sixth victim was Lynn Murray. When the defendant started moving across the front checkout area, Lynn started trying to run the other way. The defendant saw her, closed on her, focused on her, and then killed her by shooting her 4 times. Teri Leiker had gone to the ground and ducked at first. But as the defendant closed in on Teri, she stood up and tried to go. It was the only choice left, because the defendant chose to kill as many people as he possibly could. And he shot Teri Leiker twice. As Teri Leiker was being shot and killed, there was a mother and her adult son, Sarah Moonshadow and Nicholas Edwards, and they're right in the next checkout lane right there. And when the shooting began and bullets were whizzing by their heads, they ducked down and they went to the ground. And Nicholas was panicking. And Sarah, his mom, was telling him, "Don't go, not yet, don't go, don't go." And she's trying to figure out when they can escape. And she's trying to count the bullets because Sarah knows guns, and she's trying to time their run for a reload. But the defendant's coming close, and he's coming around that checkout stand, and Sarah realizes they have no choice but to go. And she tells Nicholas, go, 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 go. And they start to run, and the defendant sees them. So the defendant pursues them, and he lifts up his assault rifle, and he points his rifle at them, and he opens fire. And he misses. And they run out the doors. And they'll come here to testify. But when the defendant missed, and he started to go after them, he realized that Jody Waters is right here, hiding under the checkout stand. And he looks at Jody, and he lifts up his assault rifle, and he points it at her. We talked a lot in jury selection about hypotheticals and what ifs and different scenarios. You'll have to answer the question at the end, could the defendant form the intent to kill Jody Waters? When he lifted up his rifle and pointed at her right here, could he form the intent to kill Jody Waters? This is the answer the defendant provides for you. That's him in the white circle. Jody Waters is on the bottom left there of the white circle, hiding under the register, the checkout stand. The defendant is going to shoot her 4 times, including once in the head. Could he form the intent to kill Jody Waters? That's the picture you're going to remember when you say yes at the end of this trial, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm glad they're not showing these pictures.
The video system doesn't have audio in Kings Soopers. So we can't play for you. We'll never hear what Jody Waters was saying at this moment. But one can imagine what her final words were. One can imagine what her final thoughts were. And we don't have to imagine how the defendant responded. He shot her 4 times, including once in the head at point blank range. Could he form the intent? All of this happened, these 8 lives that were taken, in 68 seconds. 68 seconds. So from the time that he kills Neven all the way to him killing Jody Waters, 68 seconds. He is moving fast and he is brutal. It was
68 seconds to kill the first 8 victims. Mike asks, quick question, why did they have to go to trial? This is straight death penalty. Well, there's no death penalty in Colorado. It was abolished, I think, in 2020. I think I looked it up earlier. Number 1. Number 2, the defendant did not plead guilty. He is claiming insanity as a defense. Someone asked earlier where he's been held. He's been held in a mental hospital since his arrest on March 22nd of 2021. So he has not been in jail. He's been in a mental hospital. But there's your answer, Mike.
33 seconds in the parking lot, but a total of 68 seconds from Neven to Jody Waters. As much as the shots that he took and the people that he killed demonstrate his intent, there's also people that he chose not to shoot at and not to kill that make it crystal clear that he knew exactly what he was doing. So let me tell you about a man named Paul Rder. Mr. Rder is 90 years old, and he's shopping. And he's shopping in Kings Soopers, and he's moving slow. He's shuffling his feet, and he's holding onto his cart for balance. And throughout everything I just described, the defendant shooting people outside, the defendant shooting people inside, bodies drop into the ground, people bleeding everywhere, chaos, running, people hiding. Mr. Rder keeps shopping. And he assumes that the bangs are coming from the roof. So he continues. And now the defendant has just killed Jody Waters, his 8th victim. Bless you. And he's hunting for other victims. The defendant starts going through the
Stopped
store.
in the middle of his opening to say bless you to someone who sneezed. I've never seen that before.
Or hunting for other victims, and he's looking for people to kill. And Mr. rder and he come across one another. And the defendant does what he does. Pulls up with the assault rifle, aims it at Mr. rder, sees Mr. rder, but also sees there's no fear, there's no panic, there's no running. Mr. rder's just shopping. And the defendant drops the gun to his side and walks off and hunts for more victims and lets Mr. rder live. And the defendant's continuing to hunt, and Mr. rder's continuing to shop, and they come across each other again. And again, the defendant passes up the shot at Mr. rder and leaves him. What does this tell you? This will tell you that the defendant was intentionally targeting people who were in fear and who were running, who he had power over, who he was scaring, and who he could chase and kill. And Mr. rder's just walking right through. And people.
That's horrifying. That is horrifying. And ask yourself, if you're on the jury, does what he just said about picking and choosing his victims who were only in fear, that he was hunting them, how does that play into an insanity defense? Does it seem like he knows what he's doing? I can't wait to hear the experts on this one.
People who were in front of the defendant but not running and hiding were able to live, including Clint Ponsford. And I'll tell you about Clint in a minute, but let me show you this picture of Mr. rder first. This is Mr. rder after. So Mr. rder goes to the checkout stand and there were bodies there. And Mr. rder waited for someone to come check him out and eventually became frustrated that no staff from Kings Soopers was coming. And he just heads out of the other doors and he lives. This is Clint Ponsford. Clint is 62 years old. He's an intellectually and developmentally disabled person who works for Kings Soopers. And he's dating Teri Leiker, and they have a great relationship. He doesn't know at this moment in time that Teri's dead. He was outside collecting carts as part of his work for Kings Soopers when the shooting began. And at this moment in time, he's come in the east doors here, and he sees Rikki Olds. And you can only see her legs in this photo. But there's a large pool of blood forming beneath Rikki's head because the defendant shot her right in the face. And understandably, as any of us would be, Mr. Ponsford is confused. And he looks down at Rikki, and you'll see he's actually puts his arms out like, what's happening here? What's happening here is actually a natural, normal reaction to a mass shooting in Kings Soopers in Boulder, Colorado. At this exact moment, the defendant is passing right in front of Clint Ponsford. The defendant looks over at Clint, sees him, and then just keeps walking. Clint doesn't run, doesn't hide. There's no fear. There's no challenge. There's no adrenaline rush, which is a phrase you'll hear later, by the way. There's no adrenaline rush for this guy in killing Clint Ponsford. Clint actually leaves the store for a few moments and then comes back in and looks at Rikki's body again because he's genuinely, understandably confused. And the defendant is now coming back across Kings Soopers, hunting for people, and sees Clint again, and again doesn't shoot at Clint. As much as the people he killed and how he killed them tell you so much about his intent, his decision to pass up these two older gentlemen, Mr. rder and Mr. Ponsford, will tell you so much about his deliberate decision-making in these moments. That for whatever reason, he chooses not to shoot at them and not to kill them. But it's not because he's done, because he's nowhere near done. He's hunting for victims. After passing up the shot at Clint Ponsford, the store, Kings Soopers, is completely quiet. Except for this haunting background music that you never really notice when you're in a supermarket. But the people there that day will never forget. It just continues to play.
This, I mean, talk about painting a picture for the jury. We can't even see the exhibits, and I can picture everything that's happening in my mind. Can you?
And it's quiet because everybody's hiding. And the defendant is hunting. He had already gone past all the aisles once, looking up and down every aisle, looking for people. He's just scanning every aisle. Like someone may go looking for what aisle do they have that in? He's wondering, what aisle can I shoot another person in? And he's gone by aisle 10 already. And he didn't see anybody. And that's probably because they have display stands in aisle 10, where they have the sales or the snacks set up, and there's display stands in aisle 10. That must have been where Suzanne Fountain was hiding when he didn't see her the first time. But he returns to aisle 10, and now it's 4 minutes after the shots were first fired. 4 minutes. We'll never know for sure because there's no camera view of aisle 10, but Suzanne Fountain must have been hiding for 4 minutes or so. And at some point she comes out of hiding because she wants to live. And she has a lot to live for. And she's going to try to make a break for it. But the defendant hits aisle 10 as Suzanne's moving. And the defendant's at the end of the aisle, and he immediately raises up the assault rifle. And he's about to pull the trigger. The number, nature, and location of the gunshot wounds will tell you everything you need to know about the defendant's intent. Because he shoots Suzanne Fountain and hits her 3 times. Once in the head. The shot in the back explodes through her front. And from the middle of the aisle, that bullet carries her human tissue all the way down through the end of the aisle and through the checkout area. And now the 9th victim is dead. And the defendant continues hunting. And Suzanne Fountain, she wasn't the only person hiding. There are a lot of people hiding all throughout the store. There are people in the pharmacy. There are people upstairs in the office where if he goes up there, they are trapped. There is no way out. They're hiding and they're praying. There are people hiding in the dairy section in the back. There are people hiding outside behind Kings Soopers. And there's people hiding on the shelves, like this emergency room doctor in the next aisle over from Suzanne. She put herself onto a shelf with the potato chips bags. She and her husband had been skiing that day, and they had stopped at the Kings Soopers for lunch on the way back from skiing. And they were in different parts of the store when the shooting began. And now they're both hiding in different places, and they're texting one another. One can imagine what they're texting and saying to one another at this moment. And the emergency room doctor's laying there on the shelf, and she hears people dying in the initial barrage, and then the quiet for 3-4 minutes. And then the doctor hears the burst of gunfire at Suzanne. And the doctor can smell Suzanne's blood from where she's laying. And she can hear Suzanne's last breaths from the next aisle over as Suzanne dies in aisle 10. And there's people hiding all throughout the store. The defendant is looking for them, and he is moving fast. He's marching through that store with an assault rifle, looking for additional victims, and he is moving fast. But now, there are other people moving even faster because people have called 911, and the 911 calls are starting to come in from Kings Soopers. This first call is from Logan Smith. Logan worked for Starbucks in Kings Soopers. And on this particular day, it was a normal, regular day for Logan. He sees the defendant entering the east side doors of Kings Soopers. And Logan's over on the west side of the store. And he calls 911.
911, let's get a emergency. Hi, I'm at the Tittle Mesa Kings Soopers
Broadway and Fatal Maze. Was that fire? Are you there?
It's not you, it's
Are you
the
there?
audio.
Are you there? No. Logan's no longer there. Because when Logan saw his friends and his colleagues, Rikki and Denny, get gunned down right in front of his eyes, he dropped his phone. And Logan then grabbed an older person and pulled that person back into Starbucks, and they hid behind the counter of Starbucks until the police rescued them. And now 911 calls are pouring in, and the dispatchers are sending out the information. And they're sending it out, of course, to the Boulder Police Department, which patrols this area, but to all of Boulder County, and then to all of Metro area. And the call is going out. Boulder needs your help. There's an active shooter at Kings Soopers. In fact, the defendant had moved so quickly and so deliberately that when the calls are coming in to 911, people are describing it as 3 active shooters with assault rifles wearing armored vests. So the information being communicated to law enforcement is anywhere from 1 to 3 active shooters. And the call goes out. Boulder needs your help. There's between 1 to 3 active shooters at Kings Soopers. And they are gunning down innocent people. Denver Police Department, on the way. Lakewood Police Department, we're coming. Jefferson County SWAT, Golden Police Department, Arvada Police Department, Westminster Police Department.
Wow, that's a huge response.
The Broomfield Police Department, the officers, some of them are in the police station when they hear the call. They go running out to their cars. There's a Broomfield officer on a routine traffic stop who turns his car around, and together they hit Highway 36 at the same time. And they're going to come flying up 36 to try to save lives. But they're not going to make it in time, despite their best efforts. They hit 36 and they're going 90 miles per hour with lights and sirens up 36. Then they're going 100, 110. 115, 120 miles per hour, 125 miles per hour. They're going to try to get there to save people. And there are people hiding all throughout the store, and the defendant is hunting. You're going to meet a young man named Christopher Tatum. You're going to meet him even though the defendant tried to take that opportunity away from you. Because Christopher Tatum was in the store that day. There's a woman named Ilan Shakti, who you'll hear from. And when the gunfire broke out, Ms. Shakti started running. She was trying to get away, and she fell and broke her T6. She broke her back. And Christopher Tatum saved her and helped her get out of the store. And then Christopher Tatum ran back into the store to try to save and help more people, which he did. But when the defendant saw Mr. Tatum, he raised up that assault rifle, pointed at him, and opened fire on Mr. Tatum. Mr. Tatum ran out the back of the store with bullets following behind him. The defendant is hunting for people. But now the police are on the way. And of course, the Boulder County law enforcement agencies who are located closer, they're coming fast. And it's Erie Police Department, Longmont Police Department, Lafayette Police Department, the Sheriff's Office, and of course, the Boulder Police Department. And the officers are hearing the calls of active shooter or shooters at Kings Soopers, and innocent people are down. I'm going to play you this short clip from Officer Eric Talley's dash cam. His dash cam recorded him heading to Kings Soopers after he got the call that there were active shooters there.
We have another report that the party is wearing an armored vest, 5'8",
You'll be able to watch the rest of the video during the course of the trial. Because Officer Talley and other Boulder police officers got there as fast as they did, no other civilians were injured or killed that day. But Officer Talley sacrificed his life in that response. When he pulls into Kings Soopers, there's two police officers who arrived just before him, Officer Pam Gignac and Officer Brian Capobianco. And they've arrived and they get out and they know there's anywhere from 1 to 3 active shooters with assault rifles and armored vests inside Kings Soopers. And Officer Capobianco, you'll learn, pulls his rifle out of his car. And he goes up to Officer Gignac and he pauses for a second. And then he says, we go, let's go in right now. And he starts running full speed. And Officer Talley comes into the parking lot right behind them and he gets out with his handgun and he runs as fast as he can and catches up to Officer Capobianco and Officer Gignac. And the three of them are going into the store. And they're going in and the doors open and the three officers step in and it is completely quiet. Just the music. Everyone's hiding. And the officers are trained for stimulus. That's what officers train for. You'll hear about during the trial in an active shooter training. When they train for these things, listen for the gunshots, listen for the screams, watch for someone running. And there's nothing, just the music. And as they're coming in and the doors have opened and their radios are communicating that there's active shooters at Kings Soopers, this guy hears them. Now you're going to start to fill out that wrongfulness box, being able to distinguish between right and wrong, because the police are there. And he sets up to ambush them. And as they creep in quietly, looking around, trying to figure out where are the shooters. And police officers look at a supermarket differently than most people when they come in this situation. They look at a supermarket and they see no cover and a ton of open space. And they're moving in. And Officer Talley is just ahead of Officer Capobianco. And they have no idea that as they're coming this way, the defendant's right off to this side, waiting to ambush them. And as Officer Talley steps forward into sight, the defendant fires. The bullet that he fired hits Officer Talley in the left side of the head and goes out the right side of the head. And Officer Talley starts to fall to the ground. And then the defendant shoots him again. And Officer Capobianco and Gignac have no idea where the shots are coming from. And they think Officer Talley is ducked down on the ground. So they back up. They're trying to figure out what is happening here. Where are the shots coming from? And they retreat outside for a moment. And they're trying to figure out where did Officer Talley go. And just then a second team of officers is starting to form up at those east doors to go inside. And the officers from a bunch of different agencies now responding because Boulder needs your help. So there are officers from the University of Colorado Police Department, the Sheriff's Office, Open Space Park Ranger, more Boulder Police Department officers. And they're all arriving there around the same time and coming to Kings Soopers. And many of them had never met before. But they're immediately coming together and going inside to face the threat and try to stop this guy from killing more people. And there's a ton of people hiding in the store still who are hearing all this. This next animation, in a moment, I'm going to hit play and you're going to see things start to move. So let me get you oriented to this. The first thing you'll notice when you look at this one is we have a lot more blue ovals now than we did before. Those blue ovals tragically represent human lives that have been ended. So you can see, for example, Kevin Mahoney on the bottom right of your screen, where he ran in an attempt to get away from the defendant. Then you see Tralona's body on the pedestrian ramp there by the RAV4 that she had gotten out of, where the defendant shot her point blank in the neck. And we go inside those east stores. You see Rikki Olds' body. The next one over to the right, as you go right, is Denny Stong's body, where he tried to crawl through the checkout area to get away from the defendant after being shot twice and before being shot the third and final time. Lynn, Teri, and Jody all died really closely together. Those are those three ovals on the right-hand side of the screen. And then you see the orange dots. One is Mr. Cruz. He's hiding by faking as though he's dead. Kahendra Mala is one of those yellow dots, hiding in the checkout area right there. And the third yellow dot is actually Mr. rder, who's continuing to head out of the store. What's important here, as you start to realize the defendant completely understood the difference between wrong and right, is that purple dot is the defendant. He sees the law enforcement response. What he has done is beyond wrong. And he knows it. And he knows the police are there in response to what he has done. He's distinguishing between wrong and right. He's not looking out that window saying, I wonder who those people in uniforms are. I wonder what brings them to Kings Soopers today. I hope it's nothing to do with me. He knows that what he's done is wrong. I mean, the embodiment of everything wrong in the world is what he's done at this moment.
Objection. Inflaming the passions.
He's killed.
Sustained. That's the third objection during opening. Inflaming the passions.
Rather than inflame your passions, I'll put it this way. He's killed 10 people.
Well done, sir.
That's wrong.
Nice pivot.
And now the police are there. And for the first time, the defendant's going to retreat. He's actually going to go the other way. He's going to stop charging ahead and he's going to retreat because the police are there and represent in this moment in time, on March 22nd, what's right. And he knows it's in response to what he's done. So you're going to see him start to back up here. And I've hit play. The small blue dots are the police officers. And you're going to see them start to come together. And I'm going to walk you through this as you're watching it. And you'll see it again during the trial. But the police officers start to gather behind Tralona's car. And one can imagine that they're confused and they're nervous. And they gather there for a moment and they pause. But you'll see and you'll hear and you'll learn that one of them says, active shooters, we go. Active shooters, we have to go. Go. And everyone starts to run. You see them there. And they start to move to the east doors. And the defendant's in that back left corner of the supermarket. And then you see more blue dots coming from the left-hand side of the screen, the east side of the store, outside. And they're moving up together. And then another officer coming, and that's Officer Capobianco from the bottom of the screen, coming back up. There's 11 of them at this point. And the defendant is about to ambush them because he knows what he has done is wrong and horrific. So he heads down to the aisle that lines up with the front door. And he looks down that aisle. And then he jumps out in the aisle with the assault rifle and opens fire at the police officers. And he fires repeatedly at the police officers. Most of the police officers don't see where the gunfire is coming from at this point because he just jumped out at the end of the aisle. This is a picture from outside those front doors, but inside the vestibule on the east side. And what you see there are two police officers. I'm sorry that the picture's blurry, and I'm sorry because that's the glass that's being smashed by the defendant's gunfire. And it is terrible that we almost have 3, 4, or 5 more dead people. Because those bullets are right about at head height, ripping through the windows in the front area and then going through those back windows. That officer you see on the right-hand side of the screen, that's Officer Brandon Braun. Officer Braun works for the University of Colorado Police Department. They may, as you may know, they have their own police department. Officer Braun responded when he heard the calls from help from Kings Soopers. He jumped in someone else's car and drove another person's police car to Kings Soopers. When he got to Kings Soopers, he jumped out and he went to the trunk because that's where they keep the armored vest. And he went to open the trunk, but he couldn't figure out how this particular car's trunk opened. So he just left the armored vest behind and he ran to Kings Soopers. And he joins up with this group. He's right there on the right-hand side of your screen. When the glass starts breaking all around their heads from the defendant's gunfire, Officer Braun gets hit in the face with glass in his eyes and across his face. And he believed, and the other officers believed, he'd been shot. He is lucky to be alive. And he staggers back and they take him back and they're clearing the glass from his eyes to see if he's actually been shot in the face. And then they're patting down his body to see if he's bleeding at all from any wound. This is the inside of the store at that moment. You see the officers ducking there at the bottom of the screen. The door where it looks like it's misshapen, that's the glass shattering at head height where the defendant opened fire on them. That police officer who's ducking where you could see the front of her hat, that's Officer Jenny Schmeitz. She joined the Boulder Police Department 1 week earlier. She'd worked for law enforcement in other places, but this is 1 week in with the Boulder Police Department. The defendant tried to kill all these police officers. These are the same doors that Mr. Ponsford was standing next to where the defendant passes up the shot. But here he ambushes them and he tries to kill them because he knows they're in response to what he did. There's a police officer who does see the defendant at the end of the aisle, and that's Officer Richard Steidel. So this is a list of all the police officers who the defendant tried to kill. I'm only going to talk for now about Officer Richard Steidel. Officer Steidel dove to the ground when the defendant opened fire with his assault rifle and then waited because he correctly guessed that when the defendant jumped out of sight, that the defendant would come back and try to kill them again. And he was right about that. And when the defendant stepped back in the aisle to open fire on the police officers again, Officer Steidel opened fire, bless you, with his handgun.
Another bless you in the
And even
middle
though
of
it's
his
a
opening.
far distance for a handgun, he was able to hit the defendant in the leg. And the defendant stumbles and staggers out of sight. And the defendant then walks around the corner. He sits down on the floor. He gets up. He walks around. He stumbles. But you'll see the wind is completely out of his sails at this moment. He's done. His ability to instill fear in others, that's over. And the killing is over. But this incident still has not ended. But what you learn next, what happens next, will help you answer those questions about sanity at the end of the trial. Because there's now a tremendous police response to Kings Soopers. And a vehicle pulls up from the Boulder Police Department. And that vehicle has a big loudspeaker on the roof. And from the loudspeaker, you can hear, "This is the Boulder Police Department. Come out and surrender. The store is surrounded. Surrender now." And when you ask yourself in deliberations, does the defendant know the difference between wrong and right? You'll ask yourself this question. What did he do when they demanded that he surrender? He put down the gun. He put down the ammo. He put down the handgun and the handgun ammo. He takes off the carrier vest. He takes off his shirt and he takes off his pants. And he's just in his underwear. And he puts his hands up. And in response to law enforcement demanding that he surrender, he says, "I surrender, I give up." The police can't hear it because he's still off to the side. But the people hiding in the pharmacy, praying that they're not going to get killed, they hear him say, "I surrender, I give up." That's how you're going to answer the question of, did he know the difference between wrong and right? He stripped down to his underwear because he knew that if he presented any armed threat to law enforcement, they would likely shoot him again and kill him. And he wanted to live. The police can't see him because he's out of sight. He's over by the pharmacy area. So they continue to make the announcement. And the women in the pharmacy, witnesses will testify, they hear him then say, "I've stripped down to my underwear. What else do you want me to do?" There's no hallucinating. There's no delusion. There's no confusion. There's no question. The police are there, and he's trying to surrender to the authorities for mass murder that he committed. Ultimately, the police get inside the store, and it's Broomfield Police Department, Denver Police Department, members of the Sheriff's Office, members of Boulder Police Department, and they come in, and you'll learn that they order the defendant to do several things. Turn away from us, back up, move to the right, back up again, keep your hands up, now go on your knees, put your hands behind your back, and he understands and complies with every single command. There's no question, there's no confusion. He's not saying, who are you here for? What have I done? What's happened? He knows fully well that he's committed the mass murder and that he's about to be arrested. And he complies with every command that the police give him. And he's handcuffed. And now SWAT and the police officers start to go through the store and they're rescuing other survivors. And they're pulling people from the pharmacy, from the dairy section, off the shelves. All these people were hiding this entire time. They're saving these people and bringing them outside from the store. And you're going to learn that there was a Broomfield police officer who was working his way through the front of the store.
Oh, he walked away from the mic. That's what happened here. Correct. Insanity is a legal term, not a medical term.
He finds this on the ground. This is a 30-round magazine. It's a large capacity magazine. And the police officer picks it up as he assumes SWAT dropped it when they went in. And Broomfield officer looks at it, and he assumes that SWAT dropped it because civilians, non-law enforcement, are not permitted to possess or purchase 30-round magazines. The carnage that they can cause without someone having to reload. So he realizes it must belong to SWAT. The officer looks at it and then looks inside and sees that it's empty. Then he looks down and he sees Denny Stong's body, where Denny crawled before being killed by the defendant. And he realizes that this 30-round magazine belonged to the mass shooter. And he realizes with horror that he's holding the very magazine that was used to kill Denny Stong. And after that, he's going to realize that he can no longer hurt him. There's a lot of trauma. I'm going to put this back on because the victim members who are in the overflow room likely want to hear what we're saying.
This is still the prosecution's opening.
So nearly everything that I've described, nearly everything the defendant chose to do that day is captured on video. Kings Soopers had surveillance video inside and outside the store. There's also body-worn camera recordings from many of the police officers who responded. And on this, there are those videos. There's also the 911 calls, and there's the animations that the FBI put together to show you where people were and how they were moving. Yes. This video exhibit alone would prove the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Because it shows you that he acted with intent and that he knew the difference between wrong and right on March 22nd. And if this was all we had, I would argue the defendant's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But I'd be doing a disservice to the victims. And you have an important job to do as jurors. And I'd also be disregarding the investigation that was conducted after the shooting that will show you so much about the defendant's planning and preparation. But that video exhibit alone would prove the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. It will answer the questions, that alone. Could he form intent? Yes. Did he know the difference between right and wrong? Yes. But there's so much more. There is so much more. This video exhibit, though, will allow us to do a couple things that are really important that I want to share with you this morning. First, instead of this trial going 2.5 months, we're going to be done in 2.5 weeks.
Wow.
Because so much of what the defendant did was captured on video.
Wow.
Instead of calling 360 named witnesses for this case, which there were, we'll call at most 60. Instead of showing you the photos, of which there are hundreds and hundreds of the victims laying on the ground in Kings Soopers, you won't have to see a single one of those, because you're going to see them fall to the ground on video. Instead of showing you the autopsy for each of the 10 victims with the trajectory rods that show what direction bullets were traveling through their body, there's no need for you to see those. You won't have to see the hundreds of autopsy photos, because we have this. So it's going to allow us, as the prosecution, as the people, to show you what you need, but not every ounce of horror that the defendant inflicted upon the world that day. And you'll learn through the testimony the defense has all of this. But to prove the case, the prosecution need only show you this. But there's so much more. You'll learn that when police officers went to the hospital with the defendant, and the next day he was still at the hospital, and they had to execute a search warrant, which is a order signed by a court, allowing them to take certain items from the defendant's person, like swabbing his hands, taking photographs of him, and so on. And then they were going to transport him to the jail because he was released from the hospital the next day after being treated. You'll see a video that shows the defendant, law enforcement walking into his hospital room, him not saying anything like, "Who are you? Why are you here? What have I done?" Instead, they read to him the warrant they have, and they say, "Now we have to check some things. Can you give us your right hand? Can you give us your left hand? Can you move forward? Can you move back? Can you stand up? Can you put your hands behind your back so we can handcuff you? We're going to take you to the jail now." He does all of those things without any question and without any confusion, and certainly without any hallucination or delusion. He completely understands what's happening. It's law enforcement. He's under arrest. They're there to take him to the jail. They have a warrant approved by a judge saying they get to do certain things to document the evidence in the case. And there's no confusion at all. Let's talk about the mental illness and the not guilty by reason of insanity plea that the defendant has asserted.
Okay, let's just take a break for a second so I can tell you. This is rough. This is rough. He goes for less than another 20 minutes. So he goes for about an hour and a half, and the judge is going to cut him off. So people were asking if he had an hour time limit. I think they have a 90-minute time limit. The defense doesn't use their entire 90 minutes, but prosecution will, and he will be cut off. Let's just take a quick break for a second, because I've never seen I've never heard such a powerful opening statement before. He painted such a picture for me that I was holding my breath and on the edge of my seat for the entire more than 1 hour that he's already been speaking. And if you're not even watching the video, which I know many of you are not, because there's really no reason to, because we can't see much of anything anyway, it sounds like you're listening to a horrific audiobook. He has a very calm demeanor, a very calm ASMR voice. And yet, at the same time, it is so chilling to listen to and so effective, in my opinion. Let's let him finish up. Now he's going to the insanity defense.
This is the definition again of not guilty by reason of insanity. Incapable of distinguishing right from wrong and unable to form the mental state of intent. And this is at the time of the shooting on March 22nd. You're going to hear about everything from prior to the shooting and everything after the shooting. But the question will be, was he sane on March 22nd? And you'll be able to consider all the planning and all the preparation leading up to the shooting. I'm going to take you through some of this now to give you a preview of what you'll see during the course of the trial. So as you talked about in jury selection, you're going to want to know about his mental health treatment prior to the shooting. Understandably, you're going to want to hear about his inability to function, the tests, the brain scans, the treatment that he had, the doctors that he went to, the medication that he was prescribed, and the inpatient hospitalization that he went through. We're going to talk a lot about that, but that testimony is going to be pretty short because he never went to the hospital. He never received any medication. He actually never went to a single doctor for anything related to mental health before killing 10 people on March 22nd. Certainly had no treatment. There were no brain scans. There were no tests, and he was functioning. In fact, prior to the shooting, he's driving his car every day. He's working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week at a family restaurant. 10 hours a day, 6 days a week at family restaurants. The family lives in Arvada, and around this time, they're owning 4 or 5 restaurants. And the defendant works there on a regular basis, as do many members of the family. This is prior to the mass shooting. But I want to be really clear. From the investigation, it was learned the defendant was struggling with mental illness prior to the mass shooting. Because after the mass shooting, the family was interviewed by law enforcement and by the FBI, and they described seeing the defendant being withdrawn, mumbling, acting odd, laughing to himself, and presenting concerning behaviors. And that during the pandemic, those things became worse when he stopped going to the gym as much and his life changed, and he was basically just going from home to work and work to home and home to work and work to home. And during the pandemic, these things were exacerbated. And he started to show signs of paranoia, and he wondered if the FBI was following him. And he talked to his family about the fact that he thought he was being followed. We're going to share all of that with you. And you're going to learn about the fact that after he was arrested, he was taken to the Boulder County Jail. And when he was taken to the Boulder County Jail, at his demand, he was left isolated and untreated from March through December. And I say that because yesterday, some of you pointed out, did the mental illness get worse after the shooting? He did just kill 10 people. Isolated, untreated, alone in a cell, at his demand, roughly 24 hours a day, every day after gunning 10 people down. Then he begins to get treated by doctors. And the doctors learn that he came to the United States at a very early age. And I share this with you because yesterday we talked about cultural barriers to mental health. And that's real. And we'll talk about it during the trial. That's real. But you're going to learn as part of that analysis that he came to the U.S. at a very early age. He grew up in this area. He graduated from Arvada West. And his family has been very successful in their restaurant business. And he's worked in the restaurant business through high school and after he graduated from high school.
Just to clarify something that I may have misspoke earlier when I said that he went right to him. He had been held in a mental hospital. He did go to Boulder County Jail apparently for the first 9 months of his incarceration post arrest. And I guess he's going to tell us at which point he went into the mental hospital, but he was in the mental hospital up until the trial from whatever time he was transferred from Boulder County Jail. Just to clarify that. In addition, when he's speaking and he says, yesterday we spoke about this and cultural barriers and differences and things like that, he's referring to jury selection. So he must have talked about all these things while he was picking the jury. If that clarifies, if you're just joining this, actually, this is not live today. This trial started on Thursday. And my interest in this stems from the fact that I went to CU Boulder undergrad. I moved from New York to Boulder for college, and then I loved it at Boulder so much that I stayed and went to law school at DU. I never wanted to come back to New York, and I regret it every single day because there's nothing like a view of the Flatirons to greet you every morning. This was my supermarket. I lived in Table Mesa during my final years in Boulder. And when this happened in 2021, it shook me to the core. And after listening to this opening statement, I don't know if there's a dry eye in the courtroom. I would be surprised.
So let's be clear. Every doctor believes the defendant has a mental illness. You're going to hear during the course of the trial, the defendant's been examined by a bunch of different doctors. They determined the defendant has a mental illness, but it comes nowhere close to legally insane. When they diagnosed the defendant, they determined the defendant has schizophrenia, along with millions of other people in the world. Millions of other people who have schizophrenia. And you'll learn from the doctor, there are basically what are called positive signs of schizophrenia and negative symptoms of schizophrenia. Positive are more on display. In other words, you can see them. Hallucinating, delusions, and so on. The defendant had auditory hallucinations, voices that I'll talk about in a moment, but otherwise he largely displayed negative symptoms of schizophrenia, which are being withdrawn, unwilling or unable to communicate, unwilling or unable to engage in conversation. And they diagnosed him with schizophrenia. Certainly, the fact that the defendant refused medication, refused treatment, refused to talk about what he had done at Kings Soopers and why, made the doctor's job more difficult during his treatment, but also during his sanity evaluation. He didn't make that process very easy on the doctors, because when they asked him a bunch of questions, he would say, I'd rather not talk about that. Why'd you do this? I'd rather not talk about that. Why'd you do this? I'd rather not say. But the doctors conducted a very thorough sanity evaluation of the defendant. So when the defendant entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, you'll learn that Judge Bakke ordered the state hospital to conduct an evaluation by neutral experts. And there were two doctors appointed to conduct the evaluations, Dr. Torres and Dr. Gray. The prosecution will call both of them to testify. And you'll learn that Dr. Torres and Gray reviewed all of his medical treatment records, spoke to all of his attending physicians, spoke to the medical team, spoke to the prosecution, spoke to the defense, reviewed all of the reports, video, everything in the case. And they interviewed the defendant on video a number of times. The defendant didn't make it easy because initially he didn't want to be interviewed. He skipped one session and then he didn't want to be interviewed on video. But ultimately they were able to go through everything. And they were able to determine, Dr. Torres and Dr. Gray, that the defendant was sane on March 22nd, 2021.
Meredith Gray has entered the chat. Dr. Gray.
And was sane on March 22nd. You will learn that the prosecution then retained an outside expert to review those doctors' work, the interviews that the doctors had conducted of the defendant, and all the reports and all the video and all the photos in the case, everything in the case. And this doctor, like Dr. Torres and Gray, worked on it for months. And he also concluded the defendant was sane on March 22nd, 2021. Not guilty by reason of insanity. Referenced in jury selection yesterday about some experts testifying the defendant sane, some experts testifying the defendant's insane. It's what we call battle of the experts. Except it's not going to happen in this case. Every doctor who examined the defendant for purposes of sanity, who's going to testify in this trial, determined the defendant was sane. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. One of the things they considered very carefully in making that determination was the voices. And the defendant, you'll learn, the defendant referenced the voices very often. Often. He either called it a voice at times or voices plural. And he talked about having a voice inside his head or voices inside his head. And of course, the doctors, because it's their job, are really focused on the voices. And they want to understand what role did the voices play? Were they commands? Did they command him to do this? Did they tell him it was justified in any way? So you're going to hear they focused on this a lot. And the defendant would often just say the voices, and the doctors would say, well, why'd you drive there? The voices. Anything else? No. What'd the voices say to you? Just the voices. Bless you. Why'd you commit a mass shooting? The voices. What about the voices? Just the voices. And they looked at this really closely, as they should, and as you will, because I know from jury selection that you are a thoughtful group of people who want to reach the right outcome in this case for the right reasons. That was very clear from jury selection, and we appreciate that very much. And if you follow the evidence and apply the law, you will reach the right outcome in this case. Because you'll learn from the doctors that they did everything they could to try to get more information from him. As they put it, bordering on asking blatantly leading questions. Like saying, did the voices make you do it? Did you feel justified by the voices? Because they're trying to get him to say if that's true. And I'm going to show you a couple of the question and answer exchanges. They can't be used, these conversations, in finding him guilty of murder, but you can evaluate the sanity claim by looking at these conversations. And the judge will give you more instructions on that. But every doctor who conducted a sanity evaluation determined he was sane. Every doctor. Dr. Torres, at the restaurant, how did the voices impact you? Defendant, I would just keep working. He worked the day before the mass shooting. Dr. Torres, about the voices, did you feel justified in any way? No. Dr. Torres, did you think it was a good behavior to engage in? No. And he certainly knew the difference between wrong and right. And this next slide I'm going to show you is one you're going to remember when you're asked to answer this question at the end of the trial. Dr. Gray, when you decided to surrender, what did you think would happen then? They would take me to jail. Because he knew what he had done was wrong. Dr. Torres, did you want to die at that moment? Yes. Dr. Torres, why'd you want to die at that moment? What was going on that you had that desire? I did not want to go to jail. This is a rational calculation. He's just committed the mass shooting. He knows it's wrong, so his choices are die or go to jail. And he chooses to go to jail by stripping down to his underwear and surrendering to law enforcement. You'll be able to evaluate all of this during the course of this trial. But one thing the doctors looked at really carefully, and they're experts, but you don't have to be an expert. As we talked about in jury selection, you were able to identify some of the things you'd want to know. And you said yesterday, what about his planning? Can we consider his planning? Yes, you can. And did we learn anything about his planning? Oh, yes, we did. His planning and preparation included the following, ladies and gentlemen. He looked up on his phone, are 30-round magazines legal in the state of Colorado? The answer is no. Then he...
Well, there you go. Another incriminating Google search that's going to lead to, hopefully, this guy's conviction. Are 30-round magazines legal in Colorado? The answer was no.
Magazines legal in the state of Colorado? The answer is no. Then he purchased 30-round magazines to kill 10 people at Kings Soopers. He bought an optic sight for his gun. In case you were wondering when I said shot in the head, shot in the head, shot in the head, how does someone have aim that good? They buy an optic sight that's battery powered, that inside the sight, you see a red light, and whatever you're pointing that red light at, whatever it lands on, it's not on the person's body, it's in the sight. But whatever red light is on, that target is going to be hit. And he bought that sight. He also researched what is the most deadly type of round or bullet. When Suzanne Fountain was shot in the back and it blew out the front of her left breast and went all the way down the aisle on March 22nd, when Eric Talley's head had a bullet go through it from left to right, taking his life, that happened on March 22nd. That started on January 20th. When this guy is looking on his phone to see what's the most deadly type of bullet, what's the most deadly type of round, and then he starts researching it. And when you hear about the autopsies from the doctor that we call, and the doctor will say, I found green tips in this body, and I found green tips in this body. And you learn that green tips are the kinds of bullets that are used to pierce steel. They're also the kind of bullets that he found when he looked on January 20th. If he had planned these murders that morning, March 22nd, he's guilty. But 62 days earlier, he's planning to kill people with the most deadly type of bullet there is. And he's shopping and he's looking. In fact, from his phone, a computer forensic expert finds that he's researching prior mass shootings. And he looks at the El Paso, Walmart, Texas mass shooting, where a guy went in and killed 23 people in Walmart. And by the way, there are a lot of similarities between that shooting and this one. And he looks at that one, and in that description that he finds online, it says the Walmart shooter was inspired by the Christchurch, New Zealand shooter who killed 51 people. So then he looks at the Christchurch shooter, and he looks at that one. And in terms of knowing the difference between wrong and right, he learns that both of those shooters surrendered to law enforcement. They were arrested, prosecuted, and convicted. He knows just from the inspiration that he's seeking that it's also absolutely wrong. And he's researching prior shootings. Then he looks at an overwhelming number of guns, ammo, and equipment on his phone. And this is from January 1st to March 22nd. It's not that much time. It's weeks and months, and it shows that he planned it, but it's not that much time. So January 1st, I imagine some of the victims woke up saying, I'm going to go to the gym more. I'm going to read more. I'm going to spend more time with my loved ones. He woke up January 1st and started planning a mass shooting. When I say he looked at an overwhelming number, 6,000 images of guns, ammo, and equipment that he's looking for, because he's looking to commit a mass shooting. That also includes bomb-making materials, ladies and gentlemen. He starts looking at images of bomb-making materials. The number of those images, 400. He takes it one step further. He starts shopping for these things. He's looking at all these different websites, shopping for them. Then he starts buying them. Guns, ammo, equipment, and bomb-making materials. Some of it found on his person, some of it found in his car outside Kings Soopers, and some of it found in his house. Some of the guns and ammo found in his house belonged to his family members, but a bunch belonged to him. And you're going to see that he ordered it to carry out a mass shooting. And from his phone, we know that he targeted Boulder. He targeted Boulder. He lives and works in Arvada. But in the weeks leading up to, the days leading up to, the hours leading up to this mass shooting, Boulder's showing up in his phone more and more and more. And what he's looking at on his phone.
This is a Boulder jury. This is a Boulder jury. This is not going to play well with them at all.
Is causing a list of places in Boulder to be recorded by his phone. And he's going to pull into the first big place in South Boulder that he comes across on March 22nd. And he's going to kill 10 people and try to kill 25 others. On March 16th, January 19th, he buys an assault rifle. January 19th, he buys an assault rifle.
Mr. Dunn. Yes, sir.
All right. What's wrong with that? On January 19th, he buys an assault rifle. Is that not true? All right. So they're going to approach. We'll fast forward. That's the beauty of not being live, is that we can fast forward a little bit.
March 16th, he picks up an assault rifle. Second, and that's the one he's going to use at Kings Soopers. March 17th, he's on his phone. And he's putting notes on his phone about how to conduct mass shooting, how to move while shooting, like he did when he killed Kevin Mahoney. He also, on his notes on his phone, he puts things about how to clear a hallway. Do you know how to clear a hallway? It means when you're in a gunfight, how you do that without being shot. You're going to see it on the Kings Soopers video. So he wrote it on March 17th, practiced it, and then he acted it out in deadly and horrific fashion on March 22nd. I'm going to end with this, ladies and gentlemen. Be true to your oath. Those are the words Judge Baca said. That means don't look up the case on social media. Don't check the news. You do those things, it derails the trial. trial for which people have been waiting for a long time. So if you go home tonight, and your family member says, started planning it in January, that conversation can't happen. You go in the back later, even on a break with your fellow jurors, and you say to her, did the DA just say that there's no expert testifying this guy's insane? That conversation can't happen.
Gotta wrap it up, Mr. Doherty.
Save
Gotta
that
wrap it up.
for deliberations. Follow the law, follow the evidence, and we will reach that. The end.
All right, we're going to take our morning break. Thank you for your attention. Mr. Collins will take you out. I know that the...
Okay. We're going to take a break for a second because we need to regroup a little bit after that incredible opening. He painted a picture with words. One of the best openings I've ever seen. What say you? Let's go to the chat for a moment. Thank you, Happy Hermit says, confused as to why this was not carried live. Thanks for streaming it now. I did not carry it live. Law and Crime has been carrying it live, but I haven't seen any other streamers carrying it. So we're just catching up right now because this is a personal case for me and it's a very important case. I honestly didn't even realize that it had started. It's not getting a ton of press. And some of you from Colorado didn't even realize that this had started. So let me know. But thank you, because if there's enough interest in this, we're going to continue to cover it live. Incredibly impactful. His name is Darty, Michael Darty. Very powerful. Painted a picture. I remember the day this happened too, Tammy. Tammy lives 2 hours from Boulder. And yes, this is a Zoom feed from, it's actually not even a Zoom feed. It's a WebEx feed from court. There are no actual media cameras allowed in the courtroom. So this is what we got. But based on listening to that the prosecutor's opening, I didn't even need to watch it. All I needed to do was listen to it. And his story took me right there. That is storytelling unlike I've ever seen. If you've seen or heard another opening statement as powerful and impactful as that one, point it out to me. Sunny didn't even know that it didn't start today. It started last Thursday, Sunny Days. We're behind. We're catching up now. And we're here for it. Thank you. Thanks, Stephanie. There are 7 witnesses that also testified on day 1. They are eyewitnesses from inside the supermarket. I started watching a bunch of it, and so we will be able to see the witnesses when they testify. And I will zoom in like this so we can focus on the witness, because I don't know if we'll be able to see the attorneys during that portion of the testimony, but it's a little bit blurry, but it's the best that we can do, and I'm here for it. Agreed. JP Eagles. Agreed. 100%. His storytelling was so vivid and clear that I could picture it in my mind and I couldn't see it. All right, so let me fast forward here and we will get to the defense openings, because I'd hate to follow that. If I were a defense attorney, I would hate to follow that. Defense attorney's name is Sam Dunn, D-U-N-N. That's right. The shooter lived in Arvada, which is a suburb of Denver. And apparently he targeted Boulder, which is not, in my mind, going to play well with a Boulder jury. All righty. Let's move on to the defense opening.
Over these next few weeks, this case is going to envelop you in the suffering and grief those who lost their lives on March 22nd, 2021, those who survived, and those who lost loved ones and coworkers because of the actions of my client, Mr. Ahmad Alissa. Mr. Doherty spent a lot of time during his opening statement previewing for you the government's case. They're going to tell you a lot about that grief, about that suffering, that Mr. Alissa's actions brought upon the victims for the case that we're here to discuss. Mr. Alissa's counsel, we are not asking you to forget that suffering. We're not endeavoring that you amplify that or diminish that. And as you heard in jury selection, we are not contesting that the person that killed 10 innocent people and brought fear to so many others and grief and suffering to countless people. We are not contesting that that was Ahmad Alissa. What we and the court is requiring you to do, though, is not allow that grief and that suffering to control each of your decisions in this case. You just swore an oath at the end of the day yesterday that you will review the evidence, that you will employ your common sense, and that you will apply the law. And that's what will drive your decision. Not emotion, not passion, not bias, not prejudice. And one of the reasons that we talk so much in jury selection about this is because we understand what toll this could take on every single one of you. That is a difficult oath to swear in a case like this. But that's the oath that you swore. That's the oath you must follow. You must look at the evidence. You must use your common sense. And you must apply the law. What the evidence in this case will show is that during his late teenage years, Mr. Alissa began exhibiting signs that we now know were the onset of schizophrenia. We know this because Mr. Alissa, over time, for years prior to going to Kings Soopers on March 22nd, 2021, showed signs of schizophrenia. These signs took the form of social withdrawal. Not the biggest thing in the world for a teenage boy to do. But then that was paired with stopping to speak. Ahmad, he sat in the corner quietly. Ahmad, he wouldn't speak unless spoken to. Ahmad, his responses, sometimes they didn't make sense. The evidence will show that Mr. Alissa also became paranoid. He thought people were following him. He thought people were surveilling him. He became delusional. He thought that for some reason, this teenage boy was being surveilled by the FBI. His thinking was nonsensical. And we also know that he had hallucinations. What are termed auditory hallucinations, hearing voices in his head, screaming voices broadcast, not from the outside, but between his ears. And that all these symptoms coalesced and were present, not just on the day of March 22nd, 2021, but in the years and months preceding that. And sadly, those symptoms were left untreated. You're going to be asked to employ your common sense. Is someone who is actively psychotic, who's hearing voices that tell them, that yell at them, that they perceive and that they are influenced by to think, commit a mass shooting? Is that person sane? Is the influence of a chronic illness and the resulting symptoms, is that the reason that they did this? The evidence is clear that that's the case, and your common sense will prevail.
Don't worry, I'm not blocking the shooter. He's not in frame. He's in a wheelchair, and I think he is to the left of your screen of this attorney sitting at the defense table, so he's not in view.
And it needs to when you apply the law. The law in this matter is simple. The prosecution already conceded in jury selection. They're not contesting that Mr. Alissa has the mental disease or defect, namely schizophrenia. So really your question is whether or not he was capable of distinguishing right from wrong. Mr. Alissa, he had the intent to kill people when he went there. And just like we talked about there during the jury selection process, the law says you can have intent and be insane. But what the law doesn't allow is for you to ignore plain, clear evidence of someone's mental illness that is severe and chronic and say, that person was sane. That person was capable of telling right from wrong. That simply is not the case. This is the black letter formal law in Colorado as it applies in this case. And really, it's two parts. The first part, again, is simple. Was Ahmad Alissa's mind so diseased or defective? And again, that sounds like archaic medieval language, but that's the language of the law. Was that so on March 22nd, 2021? Yes, it was. That's the simple part. The simple part is made simple because, as Mr. Doherty, in the last minutes of his opening statement, articulated, there have been several doctors over the past 3.5 years that have evaluated Mr. Alissa. Every single doctor that has evaluated Mr. Alissa, it's not a belief, it's a diagnosis. It is a diagnosis that he has schizophrenia. And that, of course, as you heard Mr. Doherty say, is an affliction that unfortunately many people struggle with. But this isn't a run-of-the-mill, everyone has it version. This is a severe form of schizophrenia. This is a treatment-resistant form of schizophrenia. And pertinent and material to the question of whether or not he was capable of distinguishing right from wrong, this was an untreated form of schizophrenia when Mr. Alissa took the actions he did on March 22nd of 2020.
It was an untreated form of schizophrenia. And yet it seems like everyone around him knew that he was going crazy, hearing voices. He thought the FBI was following him. He was paranoid. He stopped speaking. Why did nobody do anything for this boy? I don't know if he said when it started happening, but at the time of the murders, he was 21 years old. He worked in his family's restaurants. His family owned a bunch of restaurants for 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, which just to break it up a little bit, will probably make a person crazy. It's restaurant humor. It's nothing funny about this, but sometimes we have to lighten the mood a little bit to get through it because otherwise we'd be crying all day. Nobody tried to help this kid, boy, man.
The more complex task. The task that's going to involve more than watching a video on a hard drive is for you to determine whether or not Mr. Alissa was incapable of distinguishing right from wrong. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that that's going to be easy. If it was easy, we wouldn't be here. But what it requires is for you to look and weigh the evidence of the case. And that doesn't fit nicely and neatly into a narrative that just because Mr. Alissa could premeditate and had intent, that he was sane. It doesn't even fit nicely and neatly into a narrative that because he understands that what he did was illegal, he was sane. The law in Colorado actually says you can understand what you're doing is illegal and you can be insane. Let me repeat that. The law in the state of Colorado and in this courtroom is that you can understand what you're doing is illegal and you can be insane.
Okay.
So within that framework, within those guidelines, that's the way that you view the evidence, and that's the way you employ your common sense. Several doctors over the course of many years have evaluated Mr. Alissa. They all come to the same conclusion. Part 1 of the test is unrefuted and unquestioned. Part 2, though, will require an examination, not only of what schizophrenia is, but what Mr. Alissa's form of schizophrenia looks like. Schizophrenia. During jury selection yesterday, there was a gentleman up in the back corner who sort of just admitted very vulnerably and very honestly, I'm not really sure even what that means. We've talked about it. I don't know what it is. And as you can see, I am not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. But what those people, those expert witnesses are going to testify to is that schizophrenia is a chronic illness. Chronic meaning it does not have a cure that we know of. The seed that where schizophrenia comes from is genetic. And that it can be triggered by environmental factors, such as stress, such as trauma, and chemical imbalances in our brain. To be diagnosed with schizophrenia, you must exhibit having a psychotic episode. Psychotic episodes are marked by these symptoms: hallucinations, delusions, paranoia, disorganized thinking, poverty of thought, poverty of speech, and reduced emotional expression. This top set, hallucinations, delusions, paranoia, disorganized thinking, those are what are termed as positive symptoms. Now, those aren't meaning those are more observable, despite what the prosecution just told you in opening. They're open. What those mean essentially in layman's terms are that these are features that those of us without schizophrenia don't possess. Someone without schizophrenia doesn't have hallucinations. Someone without schizophrenia doesn't have identifiable, diagnosable delusions. They don't have paranoia. This bottom set of symptoms poverty of thought, poverty of speech, reduced emotional expression. Those are termed negative symptoms. And like the term suggests, it means that person with schizophrenia is lacking in what otherwise schizophrenia does not have. So poverty of thought, exactly what it sounds like. The content of your thought, it's less. Poverty of speech, don't talk very much. Reduced emotional expression, lacking. And I'll discuss all of these more in greater detail, specifically how they manifested in Ahmad Alissa's behavior. I talked about how schizophrenia is defined like having a psychotic episode, meaning that over a temporal period, you exhibit multiple of these symptoms, specifically more the positive symptoms like delusions, paranoia. And as you've heard, Mr. Alissa was diagnosed with having schizophrenia up to, leading, and on the day of March 22nd, 2021 by several doctors that evaluated him.
Yeah, but they didn't evaluate him until way after. It was undiagnosed schizophrenia. He needs to move closer to the microphone because his audio is sounding a little garbled to me. It's not you, it's them. It's the WebEx.
It sounds scary, but it's a clinical term. And it's important that we understand what that means. It means that prior to the offense and on the day of the shooting, Mr. Alissa was in the throes of a psychotic episode. Does that sound sane? Unfortunately, schizophrenia is a chronic illness. That means there is no cure that we know of. There is treatment, though. That treatment takes the form of a regimen of antipsychotic medication paired with professional psychotherapy. And as you heard, sadly, tragically in this case, Mr. Alissa was untreated. He had never seen a doctor that was able to diagnose him and prescribe a treatment regimen. Now you may ask why, and you'll hear testimony about that. But the question isn't the morality of should he have been seen by a doctor? Could he have been? Why wasn't he? The facts, the evidence, are that he was then treated with schizophrenia when he got out of his car and started shooting people on March 22nd, 2021. I want to talk to you now about some of these symptoms that are specific to Mr. Alissa, that were present leading up to and on the day of March 22nd, 2021, and have been present for the months and years while he's been under constant surveillance after being arrested by police inside the store that day. Mr. Alissa has what are termed auditory hallucinations. That is one of the, quite frankly, scarier symptoms that you'll hear testimony about. The form of his auditory hallucinations, as he articulates them, are that it's screaming, it's yelling. The voices, they just yell. The voice, it just screams. I want you to imagine that. Between your ears, where you have no shelter or reprieve, and you can't identify the source of it, just hear yelling, just hear screaming, being broadcast, not on a certain schedule, not in a certain time, but ever present in your mind. Because the one place that we can never escape from as human beings is our own minds. And that's what was being broadcast in Ahmad Alissa's mind. Were yelling voices, screaming voices that he did not know the source of. Because again, he was untreated, he was undiagnosed. I'm about to play a clip of this video. This is from earlier this year. So this is several years after the shooting occurred. And this is during the course of several evaluations that Dr. Gray and Dr. Torres, that you heard Mr. Doherty talk about in opening statements, performed their court-ordered sanity evaluation of Mr. Alissa's condition. There was a long delay in them even being able to perform this evaluation because Mr. Alissa was so ill and so symptomatic. And he has such a severe form of schizophrenia that he is treatment resistant. And only after several years could he even do this.
That's a question before as well. Cortisol, with like you said, the voices are what caused or resulted in you conducting a mass shooting. You said that's just what came to your head from their yelling. Can you say more of that?
I mean, it's just voices.
What's that?
The consistent voices.
The consistent voices.
Seems he's talking to a therapist or a doctor
That
about
last frame, just the consistent voices.
the treatment, but we can't see the video, so it's hard. I don't know why that just did that, but hang on. So it's hard to know what they're talking about, and it's hard to even hear what it was.
You're going to see throughout the course of this trial variations of that phrase a lot, coming from the mouth of Mr. Alissa. Particularly that word that he starts that short sentence with, just. And I'm going to come back to that. Mr. Alissa's hallucinations, tragically, are not limited, though, to auditory. Mr. Alissa also struggled with visual hallucinations. You're going to hear testimony during this trial regarding Mr. Alissa, who lived at his family home in Arvada months before this occurred, being up in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. His father, Mustafa, went down the hallway to use the bathroom that was adjacent to Mr. Alissa's room. Mr. Alissa wasn't in his bathroom, he wasn't in his room, but he, from that upstairs landing, Mustafa could see Ahmad sitting downstairs on the couch. And he asked him, "It's 3 a.m., what are you doing?" Ahmad said, "Did you see him?" Mustafa's like, "What are you talking about?" "Did you see him? That man in the bathroom?" Mustafa goes to look in the bathroom. There's no man in the bathroom. It's the little old man in the corner. Goes back again, "Son, there's no one in the bathroom." "Oh, okay."
So his father knew that he was seeing people that weren't there. Dr. Barry, I know you're in the chat. Hi, Doctor. Everyone say hi to Dr. Barry and go subscribe to her channel. Can't drugs and heavy alcohol use also cause those kinds of hallucinations? Visual and auditory? Just wondering if they ever did a talk screen on him.
Sadly, Ahmad Alissa's father did not understand and realize what his son was describing. As you heard me talk about yesterday. Ahmad Alissa is Arab American. He's part of an immigrant family that immigrated from Syria. Ahmad came to this country when he was very young. His father, not so much. In Syrian culture, one of the things that sometimes mental illness is confused with is demon possession, specifically what we call a jinn.
A jinn. They
That's
thought
what Mustafa thought was going on. He thought his son might have been possessed by a jinn.
they thought his father Mustafa,
Sadly,
Lion King has entered the chat, thought that he was possessed by a demon, a jinn.
tragically, we know now that wasn't the case. It wasn't demon possession. It was one of the many symptoms Ahmad was experiencing due to his untreated severe form of schizophrenia. Ahmad Alissa also was suffering from delusional and paranoid thinking. As early as his late teenage years, well before March 22nd of 2021, Ahmad Alissa began telling family that he was being followed. You'll hear testimony regarding several family members at different times describing Ahmad telling them, "We're being followed. I'm being followed." And I'm looking and there being no one there. He was delusional. He was seeing or thinking or perceiving a reality that did not exist. He thought that he was under electronic surveillance. He thought the FBI was tracking him and monitoring his movements through the use of his own electronics. You'll hear testimony that a laptop computer that he had, he put tape over the camera.
A lot of people
You'll
do
hear
that.
testimony that he did the same thing to one of his cell phones. This
Here's
goes
the thing also,
beyond-
he may not be wrong that his electronics were spying on him, because actually they are. So a lot of people put tape over their camera. But JP Eagles is a great question. At what point would parents, family who know be partially responsible for not acting? Typically not if they're an adult, but look at what happened with Ethan Crumbley. The argument was that he was severely mentally ill and his parents did not get help for him. And therefore they were held liable in the school shooting by Ethan Crumbley, in addition to having a weapon in the house. And we're going to see that again with the most recent Georgia school shooting, as the father has also been brought up on charges. He also bought his 14-year-old severely mentally ill son an automatic rifle for Christmas. So it's far more difficult and virtually impossible if it's an adult, but seems like this kid, they didn't say how old he was when he started exhibiting these signs of seeing things and people that weren't there and hearing voices. It's a shame.
Data security awareness. This goes beyond worrying about, oh, can someone see me in this camera? No. This is one of a constellation of symptoms that Ahmad Alissa displayed leading up to and on March 22nd of 2021. He was delusional. He was paranoid. And the reason that matters, the reason that it's germane and material to the question of whether or not he was capable of distinguishing right from wrong, is because it influenced his behavior. He was hearing voices that were just yelling, screaming in his mind, that we can only imagine how that confused and distorted his thinking. And that's going on while he's delusional, while he's paranoid, and one is feeding the other. You're hearing screaming voices that you don't know the source of inside your own mind that no one else is hearing. You're not talking to anyone about it. You're not having anyone treat you for it. You're not having anyone diagnose you for it. And you think that people are following you. When you go to work, when you come home, when you're riding in the car, you think people are following you. Your reality is not the reality of the world. It's the reality of the illness in your mind. And you're also paranoid. You're thinking the FBI, the government, they're surveilling me. They're watching me. Do they have something to do maybe with what's going on in my mind? Are they the ones who are following me? And then you just hear yelling and screaming. Does that sound like someone who is sane? Does that sound like someone who is capable of distinguishing right from wrong? And are those symptoms something that you could simply ignore or set aside that wouldn't influence your actions and behavior? So in the months leading up to this, Ahmad Alissa started buying guns. He started buying ammunition. But these symptoms that I just described, they were all present at that time too. So again, that's evidence you're going to hear. Apply your common sense. And look at what the law requires you to do in this case. You can't look at a few minutes in time to understand what occurred and why it occurred. Because the what and the why is within the context of the reality of Mr. Alissa's mind, a severely ill mind, with an illness that was left untreated. His symptoms didn't stop there, though. Mr. Alissa also exhibited disorganized thinking. You heard testimony that he did work at his family restaurant, specifically a single restaurant, the Salt and Grill in Arvada. They put him in the back. They put him in the kitchen, not out front. He had opportunities to take ownership of other family businesses. Didn't do it. He was absent-minded. He made several mistakes. But then he was arrested. And for the last 3.5 years, he's been under the watchful eye of medical professionals and law enforcement. So we have data, we have a temporal period from before, after the event. And what does that data show? That shows that Mr. Alissa is engaged in nonsensical, irrational behavior. The party saw this in the questionnaire phase of this case. None of you responded this way, but others responded, mental illness, it's a cop-out. It's not real. It's something that people use to try to get out of responsibility when they commit a crime. Well, you heard Mr. Doherty's opening. He's positing that these doctors, they're giving him every opportunity to try to explain why he committed this mass shooting. And you'll hear testimony that over and over and over again, Mr. Alissa explains it the same way. He was just yelling. I thought I had committed the shooting because of the yelling. It was the screaming. Did you think it would stop? I don't know, probably. They were killing voices.
Killing voices?
A rational, sane person would take the opportunity to fully explain and work in their self-interest to give answers that are helpful to them. That's not what Ahmad Alissa does. These negative symptoms. Withdrawal. You might think that's not a big deal. People change. Sometimes they're more social or less social. Ahmad Alissa's life became as narrow as can be. As his symptoms deepened, as they got worse and worse, as his untreated illness continued untreated, his life became, I'm home, I go to work. And that happened over a long period of time. When he's at home, he's withdrawn. Ahmad, he would be in the corner. Ahmad, he wouldn't talk to you. You'd have to ask him something. Poverty of speech. Even when you asked him something, he might say one or two words. Sometimes it wouldn't make sense, nonsensical. Reduced emotional expression. Ahmad, he was never happy, he was never sad. He didn't do anything. Why is that important? Why is that material and germane to the question of whether or not he was capable of distinguishing right from wrong? Why does that still matter, even years later? You have someone who's experiencing auditory hallucinations and visual hallucinations. You have someone who had delusional thinking. You have someone who's paranoid. So you pair those actively psychotic features with then also someone who doesn't talk, doesn't express emotion, who has poverty of thought. And even those thoughts get mixed up, they get confused, they're disorganized. And then they withdraw themselves socially, even from and within the familial home. You have an individual that sadly wasn't seen for what was going on inside of his head. The untreated illness influenced his inability to articulate what was happening to him. He wasn't surrounded by people. He didn't have social interactions where someone was like, hey, we got to take you to a doctor. We got to get you some help. We have someone that lived this withdrawn life while inside their mind, there's yelling and screaming broadcast, and their reality is not what's happening in the world. Your common sense tells you, how would that not influence your behavior? How would that not influence your thinking? How would that not influence your actions? How does that not render you incapable of distinguishing right from wrong? With all that going inside one young person's mind. Mr. Alissa killed 10 people. He was arrested immediately. He was taken to the hospital, and then he was taken to the county jail. But since December of 2021, he's been a patient at the state hospital in Pueblo. That's happened because his form of schizophrenia is severe. And his form of schizophrenia is also treatment resistant. In layman's terms, what that means is that it is very hard to manage the symptoms of Mr. Alissa's illness. We're here 3.5 years later because Mr. Alissa's illness. While he's been a patient at the hospital, he has undergone several court-ordered evaluations by several doctors. And for a long time, he was so ill that he could not even participate in the mental condition insanity evaluation that this court ordered Dr. Torres and Dr. Gray to perform. What does that evidence tell you? Mr. Alissa at the hospital was ordered to undergo treatment. He had to see a psychiatrist, he had to see a therapist, he had to participate in activities, and he was ordered to do so because his illness was not improving. What does that tell you? He was also then ordered to take medication. And not just any medication. He was ordered to take the antipsychotic of often last resort. What does that tell you? During opening, Mr. Doherty, the prosecution, the government, they kept looking over to our table and pointing and saying, that guy, the shooter, that guy, he killed those people. We're not running from that. But if you're going to point the finger at this guy, you deserve to hear the truth about him. This man, Ahmad Alissa, he's an ill individual. And as I said, and let me be very clear about this point. Just because you have schizophrenia does not mean you are insane. I'll say that again. Just because you have schizophrenia does not mean you are insane. To have such a blanket rule or position will, quite frankly, be ignoring the facts of what this disease is. As we talked about in jury selection, illnesses show up on a spectrum. Mr. Alissa, however, he has a severe form of this illness. He has a form of this illness is what is clinically referred to as treatment resistant, meaning that therapy alone does not work. Meaning that antipsychotics of a certain strength do not work. For him at all to get some relief from the symptoms that he has, he needs to take what's called clozaril. That's been the only effective treatment in reducing the constellation of his symptoms. That is a very powerful antipsychotic. That is an antipsychotic that is not prescribed unless other antipsychotics and treatments have failed. It took a long time before this case became a trial. The reason that we're here is because Mr. Alissa had an untreated severe form of schizophrenia. And the only thing that's worked to relieve some of those symptoms, not cure, because we know this is a chronic illness, but relieve some form of those symptoms, is taking the strongest antipsychotic that they'll prescribe them. Even with that, though, he still presents with certain symptoms. This antipsychotic isn't very effective at relieving some of the negative symptoms. But how we know and the external validation for how severe his disease is isn't me telling you. It's because this medication, the one of last resort, it actually works some. Once he got on a regimen that worked of Clozaril, he began able to speak a little more. 1 or 2 word responses changed the sentences. His thinking became a little more organized. He started to understand that the screaming voices in his head were actually a symptom of schizophrenia, because the doctors over and over had to tell him, you present with symptoms, we're diagnosing with schizophrenia. And only after all that was he able, some 3 years later, to gain the wherewithal, to have the cognitive ability to actually articulate what led to him committing the shooting. Mr. Alissa didn't fail to speak about that, like the government suggests, out of this volitional choice. It was symptomatic of the disease. And only after taking this medication was he starting to talk. So again, external validation, not only for the disease, but the severity of it. Mr. Alissa was insane when he committed this mass shooting. What the government is asking you to decide is say he knew right from wrong because what he did was illegal. That is not the law in the state of Colorado. You can know what you did was illegal and still be insane. I want to talk about accountability because we talked about this during jury selection. Your verdict of insanity, it finds that Mr. Alissa committed these crimes. It acknowledges that he killed 10 people and put in fear for their life 25 others. If and when your verdict is that he was not guilty by reason of insanity, he will be sentenced.
Is that an objection?
Yes, Your Honor.
It is IO4 oncology judge. It is an instruction the jury will receive.
It was sustained, whatever it was. I couldn't hear. They were whispering.
Insanity would be ignoring the actions of an insane person and saying that they're sane. Insanity is asking that a severely ill person who was untreated when they committed even the most horrendous of criminal acts be placed in a cage and not in a hospital. Insanity is refusing to accept overwhelming evidence that but for schizophrenia, but for this schizophrenia, sorry, this atrocity does not happen. This happened because Mr. Alissa had untreated schizophrenia. This happened because that untreated schizophrenia took the form of screaming voices telling him to commit a mass shooting. This happened because, along with those screaming voices, he also was delusional. His reality was not the reality of the world. He was paranoid. He thought people were following him. He thought people were after him. He's hearing screaming voices that he doesn't know the source of. And there's no emotion. He's not talking to anyone. And his thinking is disorganized. You have all that going on inside one person's mind. And the government's position is that that is saying that that is someone who can distinguish right from wrong, that that is someone who has the cognitive capability to determine right from wrong. That would be ignoring evidence. That would be ignoring, employing your common sense. That would be not applying the law. During jury selection, Mr. Kuffner told you we don't have to prove why. He's right. That element of instruction the court will give you, it doesn't have a numbered condition of why. We're talking about a mass shooting. If they could tell you why he did it, they would. They cannot prove that. And the reason they cannot is because the why, the influence, the motivation is insanity. The motive, the why is insanity. The insane person does not recognize that they are insane. The insane person does not have the wherewithal to understand their own insanity. The insane person does not have the cognitive ability to distinguish right from wrong. Fortunately, we are now in trial. You're going to hear evidence, not just of the victims of this case, not just of the trauma suffered by many, but you'll hear evidence that's material and relevant and germane to this question of Mr. Alissa's cognitive ability to distinguish right from wrong. You will hear evidence of Mr. Alissa's symptoms of his untreated schizophrenia, and you will hear evidence that that influenced his behavior and actions and thinking on March 22nd, 2021. And you will hear evidence that that influence, that root cause of this was his disease. After hearing that, you will be asked to apply your common sense and apply it to the law. And each of you individually will be asked to render a verdict. You'll have to apply your own common sense to this and think, is this something where one tragedy requires a further injustice? Should someone who is untreated with a severe thought disorder like schizophrenia, where they heard voices screaming, broadcast in their head, where their reality of their mind was not the reality of the world, where they had paranoia, where they thought something's after me. Not just on March 22nd, 2021, but for the years and months leading up to that. Is that a person who is sane? Is that a person who can distinguish right from wrong? No verdict in this case is going to bring back the lives that were lost. That is a sad and sobering reality. No verdict in this case will stop the voices in Ahmad Alissa's head that are yelling and screaming. We're returning a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity, which acknowledges he did this. That will ensure that a further injustice is not done. That will ensure that this process of detached, unemotional, free from bias and prejudice, being judged by a jury of people that are asked to listen to all the evidence, apply their common sense, and apply the law, this works. Don't ignore the evidence. Employ your common sense. Apply the law. Will all lead to the conclusion that Ahmad Alissa was insane. It will lead to the conclusion that the motivation was his own insanity. It will lead to the conclusion that he could not cognitively distinguish right from wrong. There's been enough suffering. Don't compound that suffering with an injustice. Find Ahmad Alissa insane, as he was.
All righty then. Since we couldn't see a view of him on that WebEx camera, I'm going to show you. Here he is. Right here. I don't know if you can see my cursor. Glasses, full beard, mustache. Right here on the left side of your screen. I'm not sure which day this photo was taken. Today is day 3 of the trial. We are just catching up that was day 1. Openings. That was a lot. That opening, I think, could have been a lot shorter. He started to lose me, and he was about a half an hour at least shorter than the prosecutor, who didn't lose me at all. He was 21 at the time of the shooting, of the killings, murdered 10 people. I don't know if he has a gown. No, it looks like a collared shirt. It's a blue button-down shirt. If there's any of my Colorado friends in the chat, since I didn't have enough time to research this thoroughly, are these public defenders? I mean, it seems like his family has money if they own six, I think they said 6 restaurants locally. What say you? Thanks, and people. Thank you, Wendy Darling. I put this up earlier. Chantal, thank you. If found not guilty due to insanity, does he walk or does he get committed to a hospital? You go to a mental institution prison in Colorado for an indeterminate period of time. Zelda Kelly, thank you for the 5. There's a study called Clinical Parapsychology, Fine Line Between Mental Illness and Actual Voices. Sad but true. According to this study cited by Zelda Kelly. Thank you, Nancy Rock. When someone's psychotic, they cannot articulate. I know a family that recognized it but got turned away by the courts, ended up killing a woman and thought she was an alien. He's in a state hospital. That's frightening. Thanks, Teresa, for your super chat and from Ireland. And thanks for becoming a new member. Terry Raven says, thanks for doing this. Another girl from Ireland in the chat. JP Eagle says, well, it's clear that this guy, no matter what treatment he gets, should never be able to be free again. Oh, Emer 42 says, I was born in Denver, went to school for herbal medicine in Boulder. Was it the Naropa Institute? This trial is important to me. Thanks for doing this. You're so very, very, very welcome. So very welcome. Everyone hit the like button because that really helps the channel. It really helps the algorithm. It's awesome. You can subscribe by hitting the button below for free. And that also really helps the algorithm. We have, right now, we had about 1,500 in the chat earlier. We have only not even 1,000 likes. So let's please do that. Hit the like button. I don't think they are public defenders, but his family isn't responsible for his defense, are they? Doesn't it go by his income since he's an adult? Right, but they may have agreed to pay for his attorney, so I don't know. Right? I mean, if you had the choice, not that there's anything wrong with a public defender, but many of them are very overworked and not as experienced as attorneys in private practice. Correct? All right, I say let's catch up a bit and watch a little bit of the witness testimony. I may have to leave in about, I'm not sure how long, to go pick up one of my kids. But since we're here and we're on it, let's start listening to some of the witnesses, the eyewitnesses. This is going to be a little bit hard to watch or listen to, but we're going to be able to actually see the witnesses' faces and hear their testimony. So let's do it. This is from day one of the trial, which was last Thursday. I'm going to fast forward to the first witness who took the stand. All right, the people's first witness of the day from day one of this trial.
Please.
Thank you, Judge. The people would call Jesse Brown.
I'm going to focus more on the witness than the attorney.
And then wind their way. Solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that any testimony you give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you. Please be seated.
Hot mic moment. Just, I'm going to do this maybe. All right, how's that?
I was just talking to Mr. Collins about that screen kind of impedes their ability just a bit. So when you're not using it, push it back so they can get in and out okay, and then you can pull it in after they're seated.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Mr. Brown, can you introduce yourself to the jury and spell your last name for our court reporter?
My name is Jesse Brown, B-R-O-W-N.
Mr. Brown, you can pull that forward as well. There you go.
Mr. Brown, can you tell the jury how you were employed in March of 2021?
I was working for a company just outside on the south side of Boulder, working in the hemp industry.
Okay. And did you do some things that afternoon on March 22nd of 2021 related to your job?
Yes, I had to go get some supplies for paper towels, toilet paper, soap, etc.
Where did you decide to go to get supplies?
At the Kings Soopers.
Which Kings Soopers?
On Mesa Drive, I believe is what it is.
The one in South Boulder?
Mm-hmm.
Yes? Sorry.
Yes.
About what time did you go to the Kings Soopers?
I believe it was around 2:30.
What had you been doing earlier in the day?
Working.
And when you went there, how did you get there?
I drove my vehicle. White Toyota Tacoma.
What year is your Toyota Tacoma?
2019.
Judge, if I could approach.
Yes, sir.
Oh, Kelly's been to their restaurant in Arvada. They were always so nice, she says.
Mr. Brown, I handed you what's been marked as People's Exhibit number 1. Can you tell us what that is?
This is an overview of the Kings Soopers store with the parking lot.
Is it a fair and accurate representation of the way the parking lot appeared on the date of the shooting?
Yes, sir.
Judge, I would move to admit People's Exhibit 1.
No objection.
Admitted.
And permission to publish.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Brown, can you just start by talking to the jury about what they're seeing on that overhead diagram? There's actually a pointer, if it would be helpful, orange handle, and you can extend it further if necessary.
What are you specifically looking for?
Can you kind of just give us an idea about where the parking lot for Kings Soopers is and the layout?
So this is the whole entry of the Kings Soopers. You can travel this way down a bunch of storefronts to one of the main roads over here. And I have never really traveled that way, so I'm not sure exactly what's on that end of the park.
When you arrived at the Kings Soopers, can you show the jury how you entered the parking lot?
I was driving down the main road here, came in, went this way, and back into the parking spot.
Okay. And for purposes of the record, you're indicating the main drive that is roughly centered on the front of the Kings Soopers store is the main drive that you came in.
Yes.
And then you're indicating that you turned what would be to your right or the west and moved into the lot to the west of the main drive.
Correct.
You started to say that you backed in. Can you identify roughly the space that you were backing into?
It would have been one of these parking spots over here.
And you're indicating the middle row of the lot immediately to the west of the main entrance,
Correct.
more towards the north of that lot.
Correct.
Can you explain, do you always back in when you park?
Not always, but a good bit.
Go ahead and take a seat. As you were starting to back into that parking spot, what did you hear?
I heard a loud boom. Not sure whether it was a tire or something at the moment, and it was followed pretty quickly by a second loud boom that I recognized as a gunshot.
Two loud booms. You say you recognize the second as a gunshot. How did you recognize it as a gunshot?
I've been around guns most of my life, as a kid through my adulthood.
Could you tell what direction the gunshots were coming from?
Yes, they were from the west side.
So that would have been behind you as you were backing in?
Correct.
What did you do at that point?
I stayed looking over my shoulder, trying to identify what was going on. And as I was looking over my shoulder, I saw a man approach a van, a white van, with a rifle. He pulled it up to the driver's side window of that vehicle and pulled the trigger twice.
When you say he pulled the trigger twice, how did you know that?
I witnessed it and saw the windows break.
Did you hear additional shots?
Originally, it was just the two as I decided where I needed to go and what I needed to do to get myself to safety.
So you hear two shots, you look behind you, then you see him fire two more shots into the van.
Correct.
What did you do at that point?
I panicked for a second and put my car in drive and proceeded to leave the parking lot as fast as I could.
About how far away were you when you saw that man fire into the white van?
It is, I was right here and he was somewhere over here. So maybe 50 yards.
Okay. When you left, where did you go?
I proceeded to pull out and drive down this route and continue down this road all the way across.
What were you experiencing as you were trying to get out of the lot?
When I got to this area right here, there was some difficulty because there was a vehicle in the way. I was panicked because he was moving into this row of parking. So I knew he was pretty close behind me. And that I needed to get through. So I did what I could to get through. I rolled my windows down as I saw people looking, trying to figure out what was going on, and started screaming active shooter as loud as I could.
So we're clear, what you've just shown on the exhibit, People's Exhibit 1, is that he was moving east in the parking lot from where you originally saw him fire into the van.
Correct.
You were trying to move east along the main thoroughfare in front of Kings Soopers is what you've indicated.
Correct.
And during that time, what was he doing as he was moving east across the parking lot?
He had his head down, looked like he was on a mission to move into the store.
Calls for speculation. Sustained.
That's a proper objection.
Describe how he was moving.
He looked like he was on a mission. This poor kid, I don't know how old he is, but he seems like a kid. The trauma. This was 3.5 years ago already that he's having to relive right now. Seeing and hearing the gunshots and getting out and yelling active shooter. Let's hear that objection again.
Was on a mission to move into the store.
Calls for speculation. Sustained.
Describe how he was moving.
He tucked the rifle and had his head down, crouched, and began, I wouldn't say it was a run, but a slight jog into the next row of parking.
And go ahead and have a seat. You mentioned a little bit earlier that you have been familiar with weapons from the time you were a child. Based on your observations, did it appear that that individual was familiar with that rifle?
Absolutely.
Speculation.
Again, did it appear that individual was familiar with that rifle?
Absolutely.
Based on your experience with firearms, would you even say that he was proficient?
Yes.
For speculation. Rephrase the question.
How familiar with that weapon would you believe him to be based on your observations?
He had obviously fired the weapon multiple times before and put rounds of magazines through.
So I don't know what your witness means by before. Does he mean the 2 shots before, or does he mean before March 22nd?
I will clarify. Do you mean that he had prior experience with the weapon before that day?
The man had very clearly practiced with the rifle before this day.
Sustained. Strike. That's stricken. You're not to consider that statement.
The jury still heard it, the jury still heard it. This kid says he's familiar with guns. He's familiar with gunshots. He's been around them his whole life. In his opinion, based on his observations, it looked like he absolutely knew what he was doing with the weapon. Just to clarify something, I don't think that anybody's really blaming the family, but what we're trying to do here at least is raise awareness to these kind of symptoms in people that we know, family members, friends. So perhaps we can try and do something to help them, because if you see something, say something, right? But yeah, I don't want to put any blame on the family.
He appeared familiar with the weapon.
Correct.
Appeared to know what he was doing.
Yes.
Objection asked and answered. Overruled.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, it has to be
He
verbal.
appeared to know what he was doing.
Yes, correct.
Can you describe the vehicle in the front of Kings Soopers that you indicated was obstructing your ability to leave the area?
I can't recall what the vehicle was. I believe it may have been a gold sedan or something similar.
Can you describe in any more detail the rifle that individual had?
It was an AR platform.
When you say an AR platform, what do you mean?
I would call it a rifle. I know others could call it a pistol because it may have had a brace on it instead of the stock that typically comes on an AR platform rifle.
And when you say an AR platform, it could have been an AR-15, an AR-10, an AR-9, just something that is styled as what some people typically would call an assault rifle?
Correct.
And you're familiar with this AR style platform?
Yes, sir.
And just to be clear, the 2 shots that you actually observed being fired into the van, where were they fired into the van?
From the driver's side window. Point blank range.
Could you see if there was anybody in the van?
The posts for the windshield and window were in my way, so I could not quite tell.
Where did you go as you moved to the east to try and get out of the area?
I went back to the main highway and proceeded south to my place of employment.
You mentioned earlier that you rolled your windows down. because there were people in the area. About how many people did you see in the parking lot as you were trying to leave?
5 or 6 at minimum.
And you mentioned you were trying to warn them.
Yes.
Did people respond when you were yelling out the window?
I cannot tell. I definitely know that they were looking that direction though.
Before you went back to your place of employment, did you do anything to try and alert the authorities to what was taking place?
Yes, as soon as I was onto the highway or main road, I called the police as quickly as I could.
When you say the highway or main road, you're talking about what would be Highway 93 or Broadway, depending on where it's at?
Yeah, the road off to the east over here and running north-south.
What was your state of mind when you made that call?
Give every exact detail I can to prepare the police for their interaction with the individual.
Wow.
And were you still in a state of emotional upheaval or panic at that point?
I felt pretty clear-headed, but knew that this was a serious event.
About how long after you observed the shooting in the parking lot you make that 911 call?
Probably within 30 to 45 seconds.
Judge, if I could approach?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Brown, I've handed you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 3. Can you tell us what that is?
This is the recording of the phone call that I made to 911.
How do you know that's what's on that CD?
We listened to it together.
What did you do in order to document that you listened to it?
I initialed this with the date and my initials.
Judge, I would move to admit People's Exhibit 3.
No objection. Submitted.
And permission to publish.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Shock and Horror. The articles say that these are public defenders.
911, are you calling about the shooting at the Kings Soopers? Is white, black, Hispanic? That's right. Maybe like 180 pounds, maybe 200 pounds. Where did he go? I was pulling up in my car, he walked up to the pulpit, inside of it, and I just took off right there. Okay, what you shot at a few other people. Okay, what is your name? That's Brown. Jesse, we have help on the way. They may contact you. Your phone number is 316-323-3256. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Bye.
Mr. Brown, it was kind of hard to hear at the very beginning. What did you indicate you believe the person that was firing in the parking lot was wearing?
An armored vest.
Okay. Can you describe that with any more detail today?
I know it was either black, green, or tan colored, earthy, and it was over his clothing, clearly intended to stop bullets.
Your Honor. Calls for speculation. As to that last part, I'll sustain.
It appeared to be some type of a tactical vest.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
He was insane, but he had the forethought enough to put on a bulletproof vest. I don't know. They're losing me already, and this is only witness number 1.
Were you close enough to be able to identify that individual?
Yes, sir.
Do you see the male that you saw shooting into the van in the courtroom here today?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell the jury where he's seated and what he's wearing?
He's seated right there, wearing a striped shirt. Looks white and tan or green.
Which I would ask the record to reflect identification of the defendant, subject to cross.
It will.
All right, I see you guys talking about the man bun, finding it distracting. Need some levity. You guys, this is Boulder. We're in Boulder here. Everybody's got one. Not out of the ordinary for this jury at all. A lot of hipsters in Boulder, a lot of college students. And I don't think that, they're as distracted by it as some in the chat. But, right? Where are my Boulder peeps at?
Judge, I have no further questions for Mr. Brown.
I have no questions for Mr. Brown. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You are excused.
No cross.
Is he free to leave? Is he released?
Yes, Judge, we would ask that he be excused from the subpoena.
I have no objection.
All right.
Mr. Brown, can you just leave that exhibit up there for us? Thank you.
Going to take the exhibit with him.
Next
Okay.
witness.
Waiting for witness number 2.
And then you get a microphone and there's some water there if you need it.
May I inquire, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, sir.
Hey, that's right.
Good, thank you. How are you?
Good well.
You could scoot a little closer, please. Everyone needs to hear you.
Doing
Thank
well.
you.
Can you please state your full name and spell your first and last name so the court reporter has it down?
Johnny Leeshon, JohnnyLeeschan.
Mr. Sean, just to get the jury familiar with you, can you tell the jury a little bit about your background in terms of where you grew up and your education, please?
I graduated high school. I grew up in Albuquerque since I was 5 years old. I was born in Pennsylvania. My parents moved in 1990.
And at some point, did you move to Colorado?
Correct. September of 2020, I moved up for work. KD service.
Okay. And we're going to talk about that a little bit, okay? And as the judge said, it's important that the jury is able to hear you. So I know it's a...
Sorry, I'm a mumbler.
No, it's okay. And have you ever testified before?
I never have. No.
Okay.
He said, I'm sorry, I'm a mumbler. Mumbler has entered the chat.
So we're going to take it slow, but just pull your chair close to the microphone. I can pick up what you're saying, okay?
Cool.
Okay.
Better? Or...
Perfect. Thank you. You started to mention where you were working in 2020 when you came to Colorado. What was the name of the company?
KD Service.
What does KD Service Company do?
We work on restaurant equipment, coffee machines, ovens, stuff like that. Go ahead.
Are you still working with them?
I am, yes.
How long have you been working with KD Service Company for?
Out here since 2020, so for about 4 years, and then 3 years in Albuquerque. So that's 7 years about. I said.
And what is your job with KD Service?
Cooking refrigeration technician.
What does that mean on a daily basis for you when it comes to your work?
I'll wake up, look at my board, head to a location, kind of touch base with them, fix whatever problem they have, whether it's an install, a repair, or anything like that.
And are those generally commercial locations, or do you also go to residential?
Only commercial. We only do commercial.
And during your time working for KD Service here in Colorado, did you come to meet a man by the name of Neven Stanisic?
I did.
How did you first meet Neven?
Through work. He just came to pick up parts on, I think it was my first day. And that was the first time meeting him. I've known his dad prior because he came to Albuquerque for training and sat with him for several days.
So we'll back up a step, okay? Mm-hmm. You mentioned his dad. You're referring to Neven's dad?
Correct.
Did Neven's father work with KD Service as well?
He did, yeah.
Okay. So approximately when and how did you meet Neven's dad?
He came down 2018 or 2019 for training for all the technicians down there. And then just to help out, we were a bit behind. And so I just rode along with him, working at Starbucks mostly.
Doing what kind of work for Starbucks?
At that time, it was a PM on espresso machines. So just like preventative maintenance, just breaking down the machine entirely, cleaning everything, replacing certain parts, and then putting it back together.
And was that work you were doing at the time with Neven's father or with Neven himself?
That was with Neven's father.
Okay. And then when you came to Colorado, you continued working with Neven's father?
Right. Well, whenever I first came, I was more of a parts and warehouse manager. So I wasn't so much in the field, but I would talk to them and see them almost on a daily basis.
So can you tell the jury more about that in terms of your work with KD Service? How would it come to be that you would interact with Neven and his father and others?
Any technician on the field would have to call to verify warehouse quantities on parts, things like that, or even just to help them find a part number, certain things like that.
How long did you work with Neven for?
Just about a year. think.
How would you describe him?
Friendly, helpful, effective, communicative.
And am I right in assuming that when you say effective and communicative, you mean in terms of his work?
Oh, correct. Yeah. Okay. And just good kid more than anything.
To your knowledge, was Neven Stanisic living with his family during that time?
Yes, I believe so.
And how was Neven as an employee with KD Service from your observations?
One of the best. Really good at what he did. Always followed through. Hardly got recalls from what I understand. Not well, that wasn't really my field, but he always fixed his machines.
Okay. Mr. Sean, do you recall March 22nd of 2021?
I do.
And what were you doing that day?
I was doing some shop refurbs, which is just fixing a machine and just inventory, basic inventory stuff.
Where were you doing those things?
That was at the warehouse off of Peoria. I don't remember the exact cross streets.
Down towards Denver.
Correct.
What was Neven doing that day?
I'm not so sure on the specific repair, but he was at a Starbucks at Kings Soopers. Whether it was for a PM or a service call, I'm not too sure.
And the Starbucks in Kings Soopers is located where?
Boulder.
And is that in South Boulder?
Correct.
What happened around 2:18 p.m. in terms of any contact you had with Neven Stanisic?
We were going over parts I was going to meet up with him either at that stop or the next stop to drop off parts for jobs for either later that day or the following day. And then I would always give him his dad's parts also because they would end up seeing each other before one of them could come to the shop. So we're just kind of going over his shelf inventory.
So I'm going to ask you to just break that down for the jury a little bit. You talked about it in the way that it actually works in terms of your job, but what does it mean when you're going to meet, for example, Neven Stanisic to give him parts, and then he's going to bring parts for his dad? Can you just explain that to the jury?
Correct. So he may have had a job prior, 2 days prior, whatever, and needed parts that we didn't have there in stock. So we would have to order them. And then I would let him know whether we have it in stock or not. And same situation with his dad. It would just be stuff from prior jobs for the most part.
So fair to say you're meeting them to give them parts they're going to need for a job that they're working on?
Correct. Either currently or the following day or.
And did that save them having to go down to the location at Peoria?
Correct.
And that's what you're talking about at 2:18 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell the jury how that phone call came to end?
We were just talking about the parts. There was a bit of a pause and he said, "What the fuck?" And then I heard boom, boom. And I was like, "Neven, what was that?" It sounded like running water, some kind of noises up there. And then I heard 3 more shots echoing in the distance, I guess, as he was walking away. And at the time, I didn't know it was shots, obviously. I thought he may have dropped a tool. Something fell in his van. I just didn't know what was going on.
And was that the second time you had talked to Neven in a short period of time?
Yes. Yeah. We had called. He had to hang up, get something set together, put together, and then he called back as soon as he was done doing that.
Okay. So is it possible that first call was at 2:18 and the second call was at 2:29 p.m.?
Yes, that sounds right.
Okay. So that 2:18 phone call, what happened with that phone call?
I think we were just going over parts, just back and forth, talking, probably just casual conversation as well.
And the 2:29 phone call was the one you just described?
Correct. Yeah.
We'll come back to that. But just to get jury oriented to what you're describing, have you had a chance to look back on your cell phone log from that day and the times that I'm referencing here?
I have, yes.
Thanks, Caterbug.
To your knowledge, at that time, when you heard Neven Stanisic say, "What the F," did you know what was happening at that moment?
Not a clue.
How would you describe his tone at that point in the conversation?
Surprised.
And what exactly did he say?
What the fuck?
And what'd you hear immediately after that?
Boom, boom. Just gunshots. Echoing.
And what was the next thing you heard over the phone?
It sounded like running water, like a spilled drink or something like that. and then 3 more shots. Not as close.
What did you do at that point, Mr. Sean?
I called his name a few more times. I figured he was just busy, so I hung up, called him back a few more times, I think, and then headed to our meeting spot. We had agreed to meet at the next location. And by the time I got there, he wasn't there. And the distances, I don't remember exactly where it was, but he should have got there way before I did. And he wasn't there. So I called him again. He didn't answer again, which was very weird. At that point, I started looking up.
Can I stop you there for a second?
Absolutely.
What was weird about the fact that you hadn't heard back from Neven Stanisic?
Neven, I don't think he ever didn't answer my phone calls. And if he did, he probably called back within 5-10 minutes. He always picked up his phone.
And from your recollection, you called him a couple times as soon as the phone went dead.
Yeah, I believe so.
Did you also text him asking him if he was okay?
If he was okay. I did text him. Yeah.
Okay. And when you arrived to the location and Neven Stanisic wasn't there, what did you think at that point?
Something was wrong. I thought maybe a car accident, something less serious. So that's what I started Googling. Car accident, Boulder, Kings Soopers, and the first thing that came up was active shooter.
Oh.
So at that point, I called our dispatch, Dominic Rose, who we have GPSs on the vans, and I asked him where he was parked at. And whenever he read me where he was parked at, it was the same address I was reading in the newspaper on the online web news article. That's whenever I kind of put the pieces together.
He was on the phone with the victim.
Kings Soopers at Table Mesa in South Boulder.
Correct.
Did you speak with Neven's father at all during this time period?
I think I called him right after I called Dominic to let him know what I heard and what happened.
Where'd you go after that, Mr. Sean?
I went home after that, I think. He told me to call it a day.
And what'd you do?
I looked on the news and watched everything.
Objection, Your Honor. 401, 403.
Response?
Your Honor, I'm going to ask the witness what he saw on the news related to Neven Stanisic and what he learned.
Objection, 401, 403.
Observations.
Narrow it to the observations.
Sure.
I think I know what you're talking about in terms of locations.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
For that purpose.
So without getting into what was being said on the news, did you see Neven Stanisic's work van on the news?
I did.
What'd you see about the work van?
I saw the windshield was broken. The door was open and I could see his leg there.
Oh,
Whose leg?
Neven's leg.
his friend, co-worker.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness with what's been previously marked and shown to counsel as People's 4 for identification?
Yes.
And he saw it on the TV when he got home. Oh, man.
Do you recognize that, Mr. Sean?
I do.
What do you recognize that to be?
That's Neven's van. Broken windows.
And does it appear to be Neven's van located at Kings Soopers in South Boulder on March 22nd, 2021?
It does.
Does that picture fairly and accurately depict how it looked to you on March 22nd, 2021?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, we move People's 4 into evidence
No objection.
Admitted.
and permission to publish, Your Honor.
You may.
So, Mr. Sean, you should be able to see that on your screen now, and the jury can actually see it up behind you. What are we looking at in this photograph? What do you see?
The work van with the broken windows. Neven's work van.
Do you know who the black car belongs to?
I don't know, but I could guess.
Okay. And
We don't
I don't
want
have
to
any
guess.
further questions for you, Mr. Sean. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
I have no questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
May he be released?
Yes, Your Honor, I ask that Mr. Sean be excused from the subpoena.
No objection.
All right, thank you.
Okay, that's all the time that I'm going to have for this today. By show of hands, let me know if you guys would like to pick up this trial again tomorrow. It's heartbreaking. He was trying so hard not to cry. More than just a friend, a coworker, but more than just a friend. The trauma, the PTSD, the ripple effects of this are enormous. Absolutely enormous. Yes, you guys want to continue. All right. It's heartbreaking. There are my friends, show of hands. In order to know what time we're going to go live with this tomorrow to try and catch up with all the testimony, make sure you subscribe and hit the notifications bell. Make sure you also have notifications set on your phone. We also are going to cover the Carly Gregg hearing tomorrow, and I just don't know what time that's happening. Does anybody have any idea what time that's happening? And it's not up on any. Let me see if I have actually had it in my calendar. Yeah, I think I have it for 10 a.m. The motions hearing on 10 a.m. Eastern because they're in Mississippi. So I'm going to be posting that, and then we're going to come back and watch some more witnesses on this trial out of Boulder. Jenny said, things are so backwards in this country, in my opinion. He's obviously both mentally ill and also guilty. What say you, Dr. Barry? And then Dr. Barry actually did answer you, but I wanted to thank you personally for your super chat, Jenny. So thank you so very much for that. This is a tragic case out of Boulder. Those of you who know. Those of you who didn't know now know from what we were able to cover this morning, opening statements from both sides and the first two witnesses. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you to my moderators for keeping it classy as always. Why does the female attorney sound so snappy? She's the only one who knows how to use the microphone, right? I mean, zealous representation, right? It is really hard to listen to and watch, but I think it's also so important to listen to and watch because so many of you who even live in Colorado did not even know that this trial had started. And you remember how this devastated Boulder and still does to this day. It's chilling. It was one of the best opening statements that I have ever seen or heard in this case because you couldn't really see much because we are relegated to WebEx. In Colorado, there's no cameras in the courtrooms, but it is one of the best openings that I've ever heard. So if you are tuning in just now, I highly recommend that you go back and watch the prosecution's opening statement because you can be walking your dog with your headphones in or cooking or cleaning and just listening to it, and it will paint a picture for you of exactly what happened all the way back on that horrific day, March 22nd of 2021, when 10 people were murdered at the Kings Soopers in South Boulder. Thank you, moderators, for keeping it so classy today. Please, please, please hit the like button, share the stream out, helps the algorithm. Like, subscribe, all those YouTube-ish things that YouTube likes us to do. And thank you, moderators and members, viewers, replay viewers. I love you all. And remember, as I always say to end every stream, be cool, be kind, be classy. It's not hard. It is so not hard. I promise you. We'll see you tomorrow for 2 different cases. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Peace.